Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for coming back on my podcast.
Well, thank you for having me back on your podcast.
Yeah, you were just here a couple episodes ago. And a couple episodes ago, we were talking about technology, like kids and technology in schools, because you've got a lot of experience in that area.
Yeah, and it's very interesting talking to the state level and district level administrators about the technology integration and really recognizing that this happened really quickly. The majority of people, technology I've come to find out is really kind of like, technology in school is kind of like salt. A little's good, but you can get too much really quickly. And once you have it, it's almost impossible to take away, right? And that's really how technology has kind of become the center point in our academic institutions. Because during COVID, no matter where you were before, you got more tech during COVID. And now that COVID is over, even talking to state legislators and state level education people, they're like, it's almost like there's no way we're going to get rid of it. Once we started hitting these nails with these hammers, we're not getting rid of the hammers. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to observe.
And I actually just got to see you a week or so ago when you did the presentation with Save My Family.
Yes.
Which was a really cool thing to watch. You invited me so I could kind of like see this in action. So tell me, like, what is Save My Family? Because I think it's a really good program for people to be aware of. Yes,
Save My Family is fantastic. So it is the brainchild of Kelly Rich, Nurse Kelly Rich, and she's getting I believe she's finishing up her nurse practitioner school. She is really concerned with the technology integration into people's lives, not just academics. So she put together this dream team of, you have Nurse Kelly, but then you also have a former FBI agent who dealt with technology and child abuses and whatnot for decades, which is very dark, but Doug Hart is fantastic. Then you have a pediatric neurologist, Dr. John Condi, who's awesome, like blows your mind awesome. And then you have Deputy Gomez, who's this nationally recognized authority on tech and child predation and problems, even including things down to vaping and whatnot. So you have these four people, and I saw them do a presentation last year. I had already connected with Deputy Gomez because he's doing so many great things on Facebook and Instagram and helping people understand the real risks. And I was like, hey, let me help you. Embarrassingly enough, he comes in to the studio. I say, hey, I would love to help you. And his reply was not like, oh, thanks. It was, well, have you seen my Facebook? And I hadn't. Because I don't hang out on Facebook. I had only hung out on Instagram, and he had like 3,000 followers on Instagram, does little videos. I didn't know that he had 250,000 followers on Instagram. Like Deputy Gomez is doing just fine on Facebook. But I did know, even with his success on Facebook, I said, look, no matter what, you're still living in an analog world. If you're writing articles, and you're doing really well alerting people, but there's a place for video information transfer. And so we started working together. So I saw their presentation at Eagle Middle School, was blown away, had each of them on individually, and each of them individually came in, and then I ripped out clips, and all of those clips did really, really well. And as I studied more and more of it, I kind of carved out my own niche and got a hold of Kelly eventually under, Deputy Gomez's recommendation, said, hey, Kelly, I think I have this thing to add. And I'm not a pediatric neurologist. I'm not a law enforcement agent. I'm not a nurse. But I have bridged the gap with a lot of these other groups that paints a different picture than what's being presented by people, which is namely, parents have to take the charge with protecting their children. That's it. It's not going to be law enforcement. It's not going to be academic institutions. It's not going to be politicians. And there are very clear reasons why none of these groups are going to be able to save kids. But if we are worried about our kids, it has to be parents. And that's it. And so, yeah, I got to do a presentation with them, and hopefully I'll be lined up with other ones. It was awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I loved listening to it. It was great. And because of that, kind of like what Nurse Kelly is doing here just locally in the Treasure Valley, at the exact same time, I had started reading the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And that was when I thought, oh my gosh, I want to share this book on my podcast because this is such valuable information for parents and community members to hear. And here I am connected with a parent who is an activist and an advocate for parents taking action in their kids' lives. So I reached out to you and I was like, hey, would you read this book and would you come on? Because neither one of us are Jonathan Haidt and I'm never going to get him on my podcast, right? And you were just like so Okay, yeah, I'll totally do that. And
Absolutely.
I really appreciated that.
Hey, thank you for the invitation because again, I very much enjoyed the book. There are so many great things about it. I was actually talking with Deputy Gomez just today because he's halfway through the book, and I told him some of the recommendations Haidt had as far as being intentional with building communities around you. And some of the recommendations, Gomez was like, "Oh my God, you can't do that," right? But we both very much agree with the sentiment that's coming from this, which is, look, there's such an inherent parent participation with the damage that social media is delivering to young people. And unless parents recognize that they're meaningfully participating in this and in fact facilitating it in their children's lives, it's not going to get fixed. Yeah. So it was a pleasure to read. So I'm super pumped to talk about it.
Okay, awesome. So at the heart, like at the center of this book, basically, Jonathan is saying that children are overprotected in the physical world and they are underprotected in the digital world. That's kind of, for me, at the heart of this book. And then but at the very beginning, he kind of jumps into this is why he's writing this book, and this is what he wants to cover. So basically, he just says that, like, he noticed that there was a rise in mental health issues for Generation Z, which are everyone who's born between 1997 and 2012. So people who are currently 11 through 26. Right. And he basically says that, but these problems are going to continue into the next generation, our younger kids, anyone who's younger than 11, they have them now and they'll, it's going to continue if we don't take care of this. So that's what this book is. And he starts with this analogy about Mars. Like, so he says, hey, as a parent, your kid gets invited and wants to participate in this really cool experience where they can go and live on Mars. And you're like, whoa, what is this? And you learn about all these different risks. For example, if a child goes there and grows up on Mars, their bones are going to be weak. They're not going to be able to have kids. All these, he walks the reader through all these different things. And then he says, would you let your kid go? And the answer is, of course you would not. Of course you would not let your kid go grow up on Mars because there are all of these negative things that are going to happen to them as an individual because of it. And he links that in with technology. This is what happened with kids when we integrated technology, particularly social media, into their lives. They went and have started growing up on Mars, and that's detrimental for their mental and also physical health. And what did you think? I'm just curious. What did you think about like that introduction to the book?
I thought it was fantastic. From my standpoint, the question that he poses, I think, is really at the heart of it, which is, would you pick this for your children? And that's the same question that people can ask of themselves now. Would you pick a cell phone life for your kid? Because almost every parent is saying like, oh my gosh, I wish my kid would be off of their cell phone. I wish my kid would engage in outdoor things more. I wish my kid would do these things. What people, I think, and again, just considering the Mars example, I think what people don't recognize is they're making a decision. They're making the, yes, send my kid to Mars decision in the same breath as bemoaning the consequences of the Mars life. And if you said, hey, look, remove your kids, like we're up floating the world, you get to select one of two options. You get to select the tech and all the problems that come along with tech, or the no tech and all the problems that come along with no tech. Most people, I believe, would say, oh, select the no tech option. But because they're already in the tech, because their kids are already in Mars, they're like, oh my gosh, I wish it was different, but it's not. They're letting go of their agency. Haidt asks, would you allow this? If you had a decision, would you allow it? The answer is no, but I think most people are saying, well, this is the devil I know. This is the world we live in. You have to remove them and say, would you select this tomorrow, though? Like, if you could stop it all tomorrow, would you? Like, yeah, I'd stop it tomorrow. Like, yeah, this is not right. Then stop it. My God. But again, giving agency to people. I think that was one of the most beautiful things in the beginning of that book.
Yeah, I love that. And two, then, after he breaks the book up into 4 different parts. And the first part kind of starts with this tidal wave, like how we've gotten to where we are today. Right. And he goes into this like, hey, there's this government study. They do this all the time with teenagers. And they noticed a major upturn in depression starting in 2012. So much so that it was like a 2.5 times normal, 150% increase. And it occurred across all races and sexes. So it was just like across the board.
Right, cross-cultural, worldwide. Like
Yes.
this is not just
Yes.
one area in Arkansas or something.
And then a majority of it occurs before the COVID pandemic.
Right.
Like, why do you think that that's significant that he puts that in there?
Well, I mean, okay. I think the anxiety and problems that people experienced during COVID are very easy to point to because people are like, oh my God, I see my kid, like it's so depressed and all these. Yes, but your kid was already, the majority of the population was already going in this direction. What happened is we all got thrown in together. You started realizing, because you had to work from home now too, right? People started realizing how much their kids are stuck on these things, and any pressure relief valves that people could have engaged in, let's say the extrovert socialite, right? Whatever frustrations that person had online, they could be out of the house engaging in things that perhaps, stabilize them a little bit. But in my experience as an educator, working with teens, specifically 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, seeing them go through COVID, yeah, there were tensions leading up to it. I mean, I was working with these kids every single day, and I started realizing like, wow, things are getting a little weird. COVID took away the last things people were hanging on to that allowed them to be people in the real world. And so again, we all point to COVID because we had this mass tech integration, but in reality, it's like, look, guys, this was pre-COVID, and these are the metrics, qualified metrics of mental health place visits, unsuccessful suicide attempts, instances of cutting and self-mutilation. Like all of these metrics of health or unhealthy practices skyrocketed in the early teens, well before COVID. And again, I think COVID kind of threw a blanket over some of the bigger information, and people just kind of blamed it on that. But it's like, no. We were already skyrocketing up. COVID just gave it a little tailwind.
Yeah. And then the other thing that he points out kind of at the beginning is also that it wasn't just the onset of the internet. Like it kind of came in two waves. And something that I thought was really interesting was that like, okay, the internet starts in the 90s. And then they even noticed that like in the early 2000s, that millennials, who are anyone born after like 1981 to 1996, that generation actually has better mental health than Gen X before them, which I thought was interesting. That was kind of like it was an interesting point that he made within the book. But he says that like, okay, so, people might want to try to argue that it was the internet that's causing this mental health, right? Because he's laying the groundwork. Like, right. Okay, these people are going to say, well, it was COVID. Nah, I have data to support that wasn't true. Well, it was the internet. Nah, I have data to support that's not true either. Well, then he says it's the second wave. The second wave comes in 2012 when social media apps start coming on smartphones, because we've already had smartphones prior to 2012. But when 2012 hits, we get social media apps on there. And that's when they noticed the major spike in depression and anxiety. And then he says, but some people are going to say, well, it's all the hard things that have happened during this generation. 9/11, Afghanistan. What was another one? Oh, like school shootings. And he said, nope. We actually can't point to those things either, because bad things always happen in the world.
Right. And Sebastian Junger in his book Tribes actually outlines this very clearly, which is people that have gone through extreme trauma. We're talking war zones and horrible things, and have been with other people throughout that trauma. Even people who escaped, let's say England during the bombings of the German Blitz, in I believe it was World War II. Even those people, some of those people snuck back into the war zones to be huddled in basements with people that they had essentially like trauma bonded with. And they felt a sense of connection and meaning and purpose. He also pointed out there were these classic instances of these, hyper neurotic, English kind of Londonites that could marginally function pre-World War II. And when things started happening, the British government actually set up a plan. They're like, we're going to need to get like mass, psychotic wards. Like people are going to lose their mind. The people that were neurotic and marginally functioning previously turned into like ambulance drivers driving through rubble, like driving into a bomb zone to rescue people because they were called into action as human beings in this fight against another. So the argument that, hey, we had these traumatic events. I was 19 when 9/11 happened. I remember that. Like, I have never been through a time in my life when the country was more unified, when I felt more patriotic, when everybody was more together. It was like, stand up and salute, man, and put your fucking hand over the bomb, trigger. Like I remember my brother, who I was very scared at the time, and my brother said something about the president. I'm like, well, what should the president do? He's like, he should be in his office with a hand over a red button saying like, come at us again and see what's going to happen. And that was the first time in my life I was like, yeah, like we're America. Like, and I'm not saying that's the right way to be, but there was an aspect in the wake of traumatic events that mobilized and unified people. That's just the way we exist as humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I totally appreciate that he makes that point there, because I can see how, as a researcher, he's creating this, he's offering this theory as to why there's such a rise in depression and anxiety. And he's saying people are going to say that it's these other things, but we know that that's not true based on all of the other history, like the history of humankind. And to your point to 9/11, I mean, I remember experiencing those things too. And it's like, no, it really brought us together. These hard things, the events that we experience in our world, those things bring us together. But this phone-based childhood is impacting and limiting our children's development and impacting their mental health. And so then he launches into the second part, which is the backstory and the decline of play-based childhood. And this part was almost like, I wouldn't say like reminiscent, but every time he was talking about something, I would go back to when I grew up in the 80s, like, oh, what was it like for me? And he kind of talks about the importance of free play and how free play, children develop these social skills, they develop resilience, they participate in risk. And all of these things are really important to children. And I thought about growing up like in the country in Oregon, and we lived in the country, we were surrounded by woods, we were on a country road, we had neighbors. And as a 5-year-old, I mean, as a 4-year-old, I met my neighbor at some point across the street, and we'd go play in the woods, and we'd have these like wonderful experiences together. I mean, I can remember being a kindergartner, and it was half day kindergarten, and I had the afternoon slot. So in the morning I could go and play. And I can still hear my mother hollering my name, Alexis, it's time to come home and get ready for school. And I was just somewhere, I mean, she knew I was safe out there in the woods, but I was, somewhere out there playing. And so he kind of talks about these different components of what it means to have a play-based childhood. And one of the first things he talks about is a synchronous versus asynchronous experience when it comes to asynchronous experience is living in the world and having these experiences with people. Right, in real time. In real time. And asynchronous is being in a digital world where you're interacting with people, but not in real time. And the impacts that has on our ability to socially develop and learn what it means to live in the physical world with people around us. Right. I mean, just think about like a Twitter battle. Right? Or like battling with somebody in the comments section of Facebook. You have this asynchronous conflict that is geographically removed, that's not happening in real time, and you're stuck on your phone for like hours. Like you keep like, and then you're like crafting these responses like perfectly made, like I'm going to tell them send, and it's like it pops in, and then like 2 hours later, you're like, I got them. They're not going to respond. And then they come back with like a paragraph and they're like, oh, they got you. They're like getting around you. And it's that type of thing where he talks about conflict resolution. It's like you can't learn, like if you're a young person, if you're like 10 or 11 or 12 and you're having like an asynchronous, geographically removed fight from each other in the virtual world, you're not going to learn conflict resolution. You're not going to learn how to, deal with somebody and realize like, hey, look, this is really just not worth, like, damn it, we only have 5 more minutes and now we've argued for 2. Like, can we just play tennis? Can we just hit the ball? Like, can we just, I don't even care. Like, because you run out of energy and you're like, I don't even care, let's go. And then people around you are also encouraging, you have cultural support with your conflict resolution because the culture around you, if done correctly, they want you to get past it so that you can all function as a group moving forward. Because that's one other thing that he talks about, groups that are very hard to enter and very hard to exit. It's like you need input to enter. If you have 6 friends and you need all 6 friends to do something and you are 6 friends and you lose one person and now you can't play, you don't want that person to leave. You're like, no, we need this number of people for baseball. We need this number of people for basketball. No, you're our friend. Where are you going to go? Come on, like just work it out, squash it and move on. It's that kind of cultural reinforcement with resolution in real time that also is completely lost on a cell phone. Totally. And it was interesting. Like I was just talking to a friend today and he was telling me about how he's connected and met this friend and how they were like texting each other. And then it was like, why don't we just go get coffee and have a real life experience together instead of texting. And it was like a positive, positive kind of experience where they were texting, but they were missing like the personal cues and the tonals and all those things. And like, hey, we live near each other. Let's just go have a real life experience together. But that's an individual who was born, in that Gen X period, who experienced what it's like to have those social norms in the physical world, in the real world.
And the risk, and it seems the risk, even with a text-based communication, it's not zero, right? Like any communication can be risky. You and I have argued before, like fine, totally fine. But when we argue and when we disagree on something, like one of us may actually be bothered in the moment. And then like we come through it together because guess what? We're sitting in the room together and neither of us is leaving because we got stuff we got to do. And like, we're going to argue. I have a very good friend who lives across the street from me and he struggles with his cell phone. And I mean, this is a doctor. Like he struggles with his cell phone. He actually killed the internet to his house. He put his browser on his cell phone under a locked password that he doesn't know. His wife knows it. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I found out why one day, because I had seen him do some like go after some people on like our Facebook community group, like where he was really mad because some realtor was like, making commentary. And he was like, you don't even have a house here. This is like the homeowners group. Like, blah, blah. Anyway, I was like, whatever. But then he and I get into a conversation, just the two of us, just texting. We were arguing about nonsense. We were arguing about the housing market. We were arguing about duration of escrows or days on market. And he went into a style of communication where he went straight to like, bullying, arguing, insulting me, all of these things. I'm trying to get my kids ready for school. I'm telling him like, hey man, stop. Like you're blowing up my phone. I need to stop this. So I'm trying to exit the conversation and he's just getting wound up and more wound up and more wound up. And finally I was like, I'm turning my phone off. Like this is it. So instantaneously I exit the discussion. He doesn't recognize he's not getting social feedback, right? Like apparently not what he needed. He had fallen into essentially a communication trap where he was like, couldn't stop himself. And it didn't offer a moment for repair. It didn't offer a moment of like, hey, look, I'm like, no big deal. Like what if, like, I don't even care. We're arguing about days on, like, fine, you're right. It doesn't matter, right? We didn't have that. And even as grown men, like we didn't talk for like a month or two. And it was so weird. Like, I don't even know what to do. Like, whatever. My wife's all worried. She's like, oh no, these are our friends. I'm like, we're still friends. He's just mad about days on market or something, like whatever. And when I see him next, it's like, there was this moment of repair where we both kind of entered like, we're good. We're good. We're good.
We're good.
We're good. But you don't have that. Even as grown men, having this type of communication is not risk-free.
Right. And so this need for this play-based childhood, one of the things that he talks about is this discover mode versus defend mode. And he he goes into some of the real particulars on it. But one of the things that I really liked about it was that when we have an environment where children are allowed to play and socialize and learn and grow, that's discover mode, where they're able to really experience that. But when he kind of talked about like when people are in a position where they're like anxious or they're worried about something and they have to kind of always be on guard with what they say and how they're interacting, that's defend mode. And on defend mode, there is no growing, there is no curiosity. And so what's happening to our children, because they're spending so much time on technology, particularly smartphones, they are in a constant defend mode. And they don't get to that discover mode. And so what they noticed with some of this, with the data that they were deciphering, was that students who showed up to college and in this kind of first wave of kids who had been on smartphones with social media, was that they were in defend mode and they were not able to flourish and thrive in this college setting. And it's because they don't have enough experience being in the discover mode, having that opportunity to be curious, right? To interact. And I feel like we can see that not just in a student who's going off to college, but even our kids in high school and middle school right now, where they're on their cell phones and middle school is an awkward time anyways, right?
It's the worst.
I remember
it's
being
the
in middle
worst.
school, right? And you're so worried about what people are thinking about you anyways, because you're awkward and going through puberty and everyone's going through it and you got the braces on and then your face is changing and you're getting a little acne and all these things are happening that are so normal and part of the process. But when you and I were going through middle school, we were all up and looking at each other. And I remember having my friends who had, some of my friends like had really bad acne and feeling like, oh, like that must suck because that looks kind of painful.
Because you're so ugly. Oh my God.
That's not, no, but it was just, it looked, I remember this one kid, it just looked really painful, but it was a part of the experience. And I don't even remember people saying anything, right? Because we're all just looking at each other and we're all going through it and no one, I mean, kids can be cruel, but at the end of the day, I just don't really remember that much of making fun of people in a way that was like crushing their souls. But now we have kids on social media who are not going through puberty in a normal environment, and they're experiencing this social media and they're in constant defend mode because of it. It's impacting their ability to have a normal experience in those very formative years.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, like, just look at the case of acne. Okay, you're just some dude moving through the world. You're not a dude, but like I'm a dude. I'm just some dude moving through the world. Social media presents two really, really problematic situations. One, I'm encouraged to present myself to the world for judgment, which is already anxiety provoking for young men. It's anxiety provoking for me as a grown man. Like I hate the idea. Like I'm happily married. And it's like, if the horror I would ever experience of having to date again, if something ever happened, God forbid, it's like, I couldn't do that. Like I can't tolerate just like presenting myself. So that's a really upsetting thing, especially when you have such so few qualities to present as like a seventh grader. Like you have nothing. You don't have good jokes. Like you're not athletic. There's like one kid who's athletic and he's like a great swimmer or something. And you're like, I can't do 3 pull-ups. Trent was amazing. Anyway, so the point is, and Trent was a great swimmer. The point is you have that, but not only are you encouraged to present yourself for judgment, there's an upregulated system and a modified system of perspective, which is, of course, you're looking at yourself and judging yourself based on other people. Now, again, it's slightly less damaging. This reinforcement system, slightly less damaging for men, far more damaging for women, but it's still there. Everybody looks at things on social media and knows like, oh my God, everyone else is so much better than me. But these are insanely curated photos that are just not reflective of reality in the least. And this is what our 6th and 7th and 8th graders are going through. And even the non-self-facing content, like you have kids, and I'm sure you've caught your kids at some point looking at something they shouldn't be looking at. And they're like, oh my God, like stick it under the pillow. Or like they turn off the TV or they do something, right? Mm-hmm. Like we had friends over for 4th of July. We were having like a Star Wars party, May the 4th, right? Excuse me, not 4th of July, May the 4th. And one of the kids sneaks over a Switch and we were doing like no tech. It's like, yeah, we're watching a Star Wars movie. That's it. Sneaks a Switch over and I catch him. I'm like, guys, come on, man. Get rid of the Switch. Like, okay, we're just fixing it. Get the Switch away. So they get it away and 10 minutes later, the wife goes upstairs and she catches them on the Switch and they all jump up. They're like, oh, it was broken. We were fixing it. He's like, get the hell out of here. Like, come on. My point is you have this, when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, you have a heightened level of anxiety constantly, which is like, you're like, oh, is somebody gonna catch us? But if you're living in that constantly, not only are you afraid that somebody's going to catch you, but when you're looking at something you shouldn't be looking at, like pornography as a young person, you shouldn't be looking at it and it's freaking you out and it's making you like you have all the feels and you can't stop. All the things are like all the alarm bells are going off. It's crazy. So yeah, you live in this constant state of anxiety. And it's not something where you can just flip it off. Even when you turn off the phone, I remember, again, as a young person, I remember being exposed to like a little bit of pornography. And like, even when it was off, I was like, the rest of the day, I was like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like just walking around as a young person, that's a wild experience.
It is a wild experience. And the idea is that it's so important to try to get our kids to be in discover mode as much as possible. And so in the need for, a play-based childhood and what kind of happened starting in the 80s was that we had this rise of safetyism, as he calls it, and
Right.
fearful parenting. And he gives this great, he says, kids must have a great deal of free play to develop, and they benefit from the risky physical play. And one of the examples that he gives is the merry-go-round. My grandfather built a merry-go-round. It was up at my aunt and uncle's house, and it was like the coolest thing, and I loved playing on it. And I remember the day it was broken, and I remember the cousin who came in from out of town, and we all knew the family that lived on the road. It was like, don't sit on that side of it because it's about to break, and when it breaks, it might be dead forever. And that cousin didn't know, or no, actually, we all just think that he totally disregarded it, and he sat on it and he broke it. And there were some of us that were mad at him for a very long time, because the merry-go-round was a really fun thing. And gosh, we just took our kids back we used to live in Portland, Oregon for a period of time. And we lived next to this like gorgeous kind of like wooded area that had a playground in it. And the playground is still there, but the merry-go-round is gone. And, we live in a world now where there's like where lawsuits happen and where kids get injured, and we're trying to protect our children from everything. And because of that, we are not offering them a play-based childhood that is going to allow them the ability to develop as regular social human beings that so many of us, that we all got to experience before this time. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that like in the 80s and especially the 90s, the media really played a part in developing this fear for parents. And that fear was your child's going to get abducted. And if you don't pay attention to your child, and if you don't watch them all the time when they come out of school, and I remember experiencing this in the 90s where my mother talked to us about like, hey, you got to be really careful, and we need to be mindful of each other, and to now to the point where people are afraid to let their children go play in their yard. At the Save My Family event, the FBI agent was asking people in the room, what are you fearful of when it comes to your children? And a few answers, answer. And then one woman says, my child being abducted. And the FBI agent basically says, there's no rise in that. That had to do a lot with media.
Right.
And we deploy teams on that. All of the FBI has these, big teams, and they send those people out to help.
Yeah, they have a 100+ person team that descends within 24 hours. Like, you have never seen such a robust law enforcement response.
But the fear that your child is going to be kidnapped is a real fear for people, but it is a fear based on fiction, I think.
Well, it's not that it can't happen. It's that the prevalence or probability of it happening. So one of the things that Agent Hart says and I had him on my show again and talked to him at length about this, he says we over prepare for something that's not going to happen, and we under prepare for something that happens every single day. It's like, so we over prepare for our children being abducted, and we take meaningful steps within our life to ward off something that has like a 0.0000001% probability, something like that. Jonathan Haidt also makes a good point he was on Joe Rogan several times. And years ago when he was on and he was talking about free range children and the play-based childhood and essentially letting our children grow up, he talks about the statistics around abduction. And he said they pulled it up, and it was something like there were only 100 to 200 cases per year in the United States of child abductions where the child is abducted by someone who the family doesn't know, and they are not reunited within 48 hours. He's like, so again, 100 cases a year, or 150, something between 100 and 200. It's like terrible. 100 to 200, that should absolutely not happen. But when we're looking at children being hit by cars every day, being sexually abused by a neighbor every single day, by drowning in pools every single day, by being crushed by something every single day, because like these are the top 10 things you need to worry about, like being suffocated, being crushed, drowning in a pool. Yet we're worried about child abduction and gun safety. Right. So we over prepare for things that are very uncommon, but very upsetting to us. And we under prepare for things that are hyper common and we're just not looking out for because they're not like, all right, look, I don't want my kid getting molested at all, like 100%, but I want them being abducted even less. Right. I want them being killed by a gun even less. So I prepare for the abduction and the gun. And, theoretically, the Matt that has kids that doesn't know about this, then doesn't worry about the kids getting molested. So yeah, he makes that point, and Haidt actually really emphasizes that as well, which is the media got people worked up. They started following their kids like crazy. Our kids also transitioned away from being economically important to emotionally priceless. Right. So again, when you had 12 kids, they were going to help you on the farm, 1930 style, transitioning to 2020, where it's, I will do anything to keep their emotional state stable. I don't need to have 12 kids to help me on the farm and be an economic asset. I need my one kid to be the most emotionally sensitive and capable person ever. So I will do anything to stop them from being emotionally damaged. That transition has also led parents to not just the helicopter parent, but the bulldozer parent that smooths out the world in front of the kid completely. So the kid literally just marginally walks forward. His example with the dome, the geodesic dome, that I thought was such an astute point, that they had tried to make this completely insulated biodome, and they put in these trees from rainforest that were supposed to do this like incredible job of bringing and filtering water and all these things. Like they all fell over because in the actual rainforest, in areas where you have these monster trees, they sway back and forth. And as they sway one way, they actually compress the wood cells on that side. Then they sway back and compress those wood cells. And you make this tree, the anti-fragility concept, you make this tree that with this swaying becomes so compressed and so hard and so steady that you can't knock it over. It also makes microcavities around the root system, so the roots expand more and go deeply and all these things. It's getting out of the way of the world from making our kids stronger that we stopped doing. At least that's the point that I think he was getting at.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Well, and I'll go back and say, I really like what you offer here in terms of like, the media came in and from my estimation, they created a fictitious problem in terms of creating fear out of something that was very small and noticing the things that, what are the things that are actually going to impact our kids? Those 5 things that you said, right? We're noticing those things, but we're not focusing on those things. We're over preparing in these other areas that are most likely, the probability is so minute that's really going to happen to us. And so, but what I feel like is that a parent's fear was preyed upon. Ultimately, that these fears that parents have are real. And so I feel like one of the things that Jonathan doesn't address in the book, but I think that is really important as parents as we're working through and trying to understand how we can help our children, is working to address some of our own fears. I mean, I was just on social media and I saw a woman give an example of getting out of a car with her 3 children and, hold on to my leg, hold on to my leg, hold on to my leg. And then she's saying to the other kid, hold on to my leg, hold on to my leg. And I'm watching this and I'm just like, whoa, what is happening here? And I go and I read the comments and everyone's like, that's so good. What a great tip. I'm going to do that with my kids. What a great tip. Yeah. I'm going to do that with my kids. And I'm thinking, I feel like you're really perpetuating fear in a moment when it's like, yeah, teach your children how to be obedient when you get out of a car in a parking lot. But what you're offering is a parent who is so anxious and fearful about what might happen to their child in a parking lot that you're passing that on to your kids.
Okay, yes, I do agree that fears were preyed upon. And I do believe the media found the most upsetting, insane thing it could and just corkscrewed it. And they're like, hey, every time we run a story about an abduction, people are glued to their damn TVs. I mean, think about classic examples of 9/11. There were people in our communities that, broke and like couldn't get off the couch watching CNN and like rewatching videos of the towers coming down. They couldn't stop watching updates about going after Al Qaeda. It was a really horrible, upsetting time. But go back even farther than that and recount the O.J. Simpson trial. That was streamed for 2 years. 2 years, there were complete channels that only showed O.J. Simpson court trials. Now, I'm not likening O.J. Simpson to people getting abducted, but the media is going to find the thing that people will watch the most. And we know absolutely now, unequivocally, that people will watch the train wreck. They are going to rubberneck. They are going to look at the thing that's upsetting and scary and really gets them worked up. That's just the way humans are. And the news media in introducing the 24-hour news cycle in the 90s, and really like fighting for ratings like crazy. I remember when I was a kid, after like 10 o'clock, the news or the TV channels just went scratchy. They're like, I remember being 5 and like sneaking down and turning on the TV. I don't know why. I was just like, blah, blah. And I'm sure somebody found me. They're like, go back to bed. What are you doing? But I remember going downstairs and it was like 11 o'clock and like this 5-year-old just wandering around, and I turned on the TV and it was all scratchy channels. I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, this is supposed to work. Now, oh, no. 24-hour news cycle. And you have to fill that time with something. The thing that I think was the prelude to, he talks about the attention economy and getting people's attention with social media. I think taking advantage of parent fears was just an earlier version of that. We need people's attention on radio. We need people's attention on TV. And we figure out that as we have more access to more upsetting national and world-based news, we knew people would pay attention to that. And that's what we corkscrewed under their thumbnails. That's what led parents to being even more anxious and more structured and more blah, blah, blah. And as I'm sure you're going to point out, people got more anxious about their kids' academic performance too, which led them to having more structured academic experiences.
Well, and this is why, again, I think it's so important for parents to be aware that, hey, while we're helping our children and maybe trying, as we are going to get to in a moment, pull away some of these things and tips to do that, also be aware, what are some of my anxieties and fears around being a parent and being in certain situations? And how is this not helping my child develop in a normal physical world as a kid?
Can I give you an example?
Yeah, please.
Okay, working with this girl. She wanted to go to Princeton. Okay, very bright student, very capable. She was an awesome lacrosse player, but she was a dynamite student. And she was like really into epigenetics, even as a junior, okay? Parents very well-to-do, mom super anxious. Okay, now this girl, I developed very good rapport with my students, and I was working one-on-one with this girl, and her mom would come and she's like, oh my gosh, is she going to be okay? I'm like, she has a 4.5 GPA. Like, she's going to be okay. And the mom did this enough times that after like the 4th or 5th session with this kid, I was like, hey, look, do your mom always do that? She was like, yeah. I'm like, this is trash, right? She's like, what do you mean? And I explained to her, like, you're not only going to be fine, you're going to be great. And to the degree that you can, do not let your mom's anxiety or constant questioning about your capacity to be okay affect where you think you're going, because you're going to the top and like, you're going to have to work for it, but you're going to go. And one of the last sessions I had with her, the mom came in and did the whole, like, is she going to be okay? And the daughter was like, I'm going to be fine, mom. I'm going to be fine. I was like, oh, snap. And this girl had gained the confidence to speak up to her, for herself, to her parents. But I saw parents like that all the time that were just convinced that for whatever reason, their kid was not going to be okay. Everything was going to be bad, especially in academic-based things. But it's like, what are you really articulating? Do you think your kid is going to end up like this homeless person if they don't get a such and such a score on the SAT or the ACT, if they don't go to this college? And I think people actually do feel that. If you made them articulate it, they would realize how insane it is, or they would refuse to articulate it. What's your worst fear? They're not going to have a chance. What's your worst fear? It's not going to be, what's your worst fear? I can't talk about this. Like, they wouldn't even say it. They wouldn't even say it out loud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just, again, as we work through this stuff, parents, be reflective on like how your fears are impacting and creating these types of environments, right, for our kids. I think it's a really important point. So then he goes into section 3 and he's talking about the great rewiring and the rise of the phone-based childhood. And he talks about these 4 foundational harms because of the rise of a phone-based childhood. So the first one he talks about is social deprivation, and that when cell phones are introduced to kids and they get to be on these social media platforms, their time spent with their friends is cut in half. That's significant. I mean, I just even think about, like, I can just only see COVID at this moment in my mind, but I know because my kids were kind of like that age during COVID, but we happen to live in an environment prior to COVID where we wanted our kids to go out and play with people. But that I could see how when my kids had access to tech, they didn't want to have those experiences, that they were being pulled towards technology. And I was telling you somewhat recently that my youngest child we pulled her, she got an iPad at or not at Christmas time, at the beginning of the school year. We wanted to get her an iPad for some of the tech purposes for some of the tutoring that she was having. And we just kind of thought, hey, this will be a great opportunity to integrate this stuff. Right. And
Sure.
then it was like, oh gosh, now I'm really like, I mean, I put all the controls on there, and all these different things, but gosh, she's getting access to this a little bit more than I want. And then all of a sudden it was like, you know what, we're going to take this away for a month. And she was frustrated for a couple of days and then was over it. And I'll never forget asking her, hey, do you want to go out of town? Dad's going to go see your older sibling down in college and the singing thing. Would you like to go? And without hesitation, she was like, yeah, that sounds fun. I don't have anything else going on. That wasn't happening when she had access to the iPad or thought that she had more access to it. And that's what I feel like some of these foundational harms, this social deprivation that Jonathan's talking about, that like when they have this access and this social media, they get sucked into it and they want to spend more time on that than they do with their friends in the real world.
I love this example specifically because I think this is not just children. And I'll tell you one from my life. I don't allow my kids to have tech. It's not that I never did. I did. I totally was like, even before this book, I'm like, I'm out. This is all over. Like, and by the way, I'm here to tell you it's so much better. It's so much better. But one thing that is really clear, my oldest son really likes to read. And that's great. Like, awesome. You like to read. He's a bookworm, enjoys it. No problem. He asked me recently, he's like, Dad, do you want to read this book? It's like, it's some fantasy book, right? It's like, ogres and whatever. I'm like, yeah, okay, great. And as I took away the tech, I committed to my kids also. I'm like, I'll take the tech away from myself. And I found myself in these really weird kind of like anxious moments where even as an adult, I had started losing the capacity to just sit on your ass and just don't do anything, right? Like that's all you got to do. You're at swim practice, just sit here and do nothing. It's like, stop reaching for your pocket. And what I started doing is I would carry around this book, right? And it would be, I'm sitting in bed. I don't bring my phone into my bedroom anymore. So I'd sit in bed and amazingly, I wouldn't even turn on the TV. And then I'd just fall asleep when I was ready to go to sleep instead of perpetuating waking hours with nothing. I'm like scrolling through my phone or watching TV. It's nothing. I'm not doing it. So I'd like read this book. I'm like, okay, this book is no longer enjoyable enough for me to like stay up. I'm just going to go to bed. So I started getting like more sleep, which was awesome. But I also started reading this book. I'm now on the second book in the series. It's called Fablehaven in case you want to check it out. It's fantastic. Yeah. Oh, they just found Seth. He's not dead. Okay. Anyway, the point is,
you're ruining it for people.
I know, right? So I'm reading this Fablehaven book. This is not something that I would have had space in my life for, even to connect with my own child. So even within a family unit, not cross family units or social engagements, even with my own child, now I'm reading this book because it's liberated time and allowed me to be like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. As adults, we have to lead the way, right? As an adult, this is something I want to teach my son because I want to train him to manage his tech, which he will have to engage with as an adult. And it's, hey, if you have spare time, you got an energetic brain like I do, you're going to have something to occupy your time or the world will occupy it for you. They're dying to get your attention and you need to be very covetous of that. Like you need to really guard that. You need to put that somewhere specifically because idle hands now more than ever are absolutely the work of the devil because the devil stretches forever with your cell phone, right? Not to be biblical about it, but it's literally whatever you can get into that's bad on your phone, you will get into. You're just not going to be able to stop yourself. Occupy your time with something else. I wouldn't have had the capacity to do that. Just like your daughter may have rejected the offering to go on a trip, just like my kids reject the offer to, go shoot BB guns or play Legos. If they have technology to fill their time, there's none of that.
Yeah. And I don't even remember it maybe is within this book, but the Dr. Condi was the one who brought up this idea, and we have talked about our kids with it. But when you look at brain development, and I think Jonathan does get into it in here, but when you look at brain development and when you're looking at the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and all these types of things, children don't have the capacity to self-control when it comes to social media and technology until that's fully developed, that prefrontal cortex is developed at the age of 25. So until then, it is a parent's responsibility to step in and offer those limits and controls, because kids need that help along the way. And that links into another one of the foundational harms, which is sleep deprivation, which you just mentioned about, hey, when you're scrolling at night, it's an endless feed, and that blue light will keep you up and you'll just scroll. And teenagers aren't even tired until 10 or 11 anyways at night, because that's how their body naturally develops. So they're not going to be going to bed until 10 or 11 anyways. And then if they have access to that phone, that just creeps later and later. And then they have those early start times and they are monsters. They're grouchy monsters when they get to that high school in the morning, because of the sleep deprivation from what is natural in their bodies anyways for their development. But then because of that cell phone that they've had access to for all that social media that they do the end the scrolling on.
Right. And nothing good happens on the internet after 9 o'clock. Like nothing good happens on the internet anyway, but like definitely nothing good happens after 9 p.m. It's like, why do you need the phone in here? Mm-hmm. And it's just it's so apparent that anybody who looks at the life that teens and young children with cell phones, happen to be living, these lives that they're engaged in now. If you gave somebody, the floating 2-button option, which is like, okay, which button do you want? Do you want the tech where they're up and strung out till like 2 a.m., either scrolling or playing video games, which is another thing I appreciate that Haidt did, was really go into the nuances of video game addiction and problems that people have, specifically young men. Would you want that? Or would you want he runs out of things to do and then just passes out? There's a beautiful article I read years ago that was talking about 2 sleeps. And it essentially emphasized look, in Victorian England, there was an argument to be made for the prevalence and, the lack of prevalence of lamp oil. Okay. And one of the reasons that they think that the middle class outbred the upper class is because the upper class could afford lamp oil and would then naturally stay up later, and they would pass out and just go to sleep. But if you read back into literature, going back, 400, 500, 600 years, you hear people start making references to their first and second sleep, because essentially what they were arguing is the lower and middle class couldn't afford lamp oil. So when it got dark outside, it really got dark. And yeah, maybe they could light momentarily or for a certain period of time one area of their house, but they would largely just go to sleep. Like people would naturally fall asleep. And what you do if you take away all artificial light is you realize you actually start falling asleep very early, and then you wake up for a brief period of time during the middle of the night, like 1 or 2 a.m. You're up, you kind of futz around, and then you go back to sleep, your second sleep. And they were hypothesizing that the lower and middle class actually outbred the upper class and the elites, because they would wake up and they were next to each other and they got nothing else going on, and they would naturally wake up, whereas the other people would get a condensed 8 hours and they would fall asleep and not wake up until the morning time. And they did a bunch of studies with this where they took people's tech away and all of a sudden people started falling asleep and then briefly waking up, maybe writing a couple notes, a little tiny light, and then they'd go back to sleep. So there are these sleep patterns that we've already interrupted with the prevalence of unnatural light up in 10, 11, 12, 1 a.m. So if you talk about the natural progression of the teen and how much sleep the teen needs, we've already screwed it up. Take away all technology aside from just lights and a normal TV. We've already screwed it up. They should be passing out at 9:30, as should all of us, and perhaps waking up a little bit and then falling back asleep. But this just exacerbates it extremely.
Mm-hmm. And then the third, what is it called?
I appreciate that you tolerate my total rant of
no, I love it.
digressions.
It's so good. They're so good. I just there's so many good things in here that I'm
yes, it's so great.
I just wanting to make sure I get to all these things. But your stories just really add to everything that's in here, Matt.
I appreciate you, Alexis.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it. So the third foundational harm he talks about is this attention fragmentation. And this is where we're seeing, as a teenager and even as an adult, the phone you can't go 5 or 10 minutes without the phone dinging at you. It's in your pocket. I mean, I had a friend in my PhD cohort say to me, because I was like, gosh, I'm constantly interrupted. And he was like, just put your phone on Do Not Disturb. And I noticed whenever I would text him, his phone is always on Do Not Disturb. And he's like, just put your phone on Do Not Disturb and it'll be great. And you can get to it when you get to it. And I was like, oh, that's gold. And that's actually really changed my experience as an adult over the last couple of months. I'm generally always on Do Not Disturb. And I have my watch or I can see when someone calls and I take it off. But it was interesting because I was just after, finishing reading this book, and I'm sitting at church with my family, and, my teenagers, like, they have cell phones, they've got smartphones. And my son, my like near 16-year-old son, is sitting next to me, and I can see his phone is vibrating, and he pulls it out, and it's a friend, And one of the things that is spoken about in the book, but I feel like we all know, is the importance of being able to sit and have a moment of reflection, of reverence, of connecting with ourselves, with nature, with whatever we're trying to do there. And so I looked at my teenager and I was like, why don't you just put that in my purse? Just put it in my purse. I mean, just like sit here and experience this. And so he did. And I was talking to him afterwards, after church was over, and I was like, how was that? And he was like, I'd already like kind of not been looking at it during the first hour. So for the second hour, when I went to Sunday school with my peers, I actually was like really participating. It's not that he hasn't before, but he started just even in that small, because we've had some conversations about this, he started noticing some of his peers who were just like kind of glued to their cell phones and not paying attention at all. And how I think he really did enjoy having that kind of pushed by mom 1 hour of not having something dinging. And he, like, don't get me wrong, like my kids, they have to turn their phones in. There's all these different things. Sure. They're in the classroom at school and, they're not allowed to have their cell phones on them. But it was a moment that I got to observe as a parent. And I got to observe my child just sitting and listening and experiencing. And it was really valuable for him because that phone and that social media are fragmenting their attention to the point where they're not really able to sit and relax and have those moments of reverence that are really important for just being a human.
This was a part of the book that I deeply feel as well, because I've started doing when I get home at 5, I don't even take my phone in the house. I leave it in a garage in like a bin. Okay. And then I don't even touch it until 8 o'clock. And what I've realized is attention fragmentation. Even if I'm not doing something like scrolling through social media, say I'm just sending a text back or I shoot a quick email back or whatever it might be, I'm simultaneously having like 12 conversations with different people. And even though I'm not physically engaging in that, my brain is thinking through the different conversations or going back to the different things I need to get done or different things to consider. Or God forbid, somebody texts me back in the middle of one of these conversations with like an action item that I have to do. I'm like, oh no, like now I really have to like do this thing. And now I'm worried about things. So having a period of time where I removed myself from that attention fragmentation just with normal conversations, not even social media, notifications and stuff, but just, you might text me. And if I see it, I'm be like, oh, what did Alexis say? Like, whatever. It has been so good for me as a 42-year-old man to get the hell away from that for a certain period of time. And if something comes up that I think about, I actually have a field guide that I walk around. It's like a little zipper pouch thing with like a pencil in it. And I literally write myself a note and then I put it back in my pocket. And now I have confidence, like, you won't forget that thing. You'll get it done. So at 8 o'clock, I run down the list. It's 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Then the phone's gone. So I've actually recaptured 5 p.m., a small blip at 8, and then I'm done with my phone. So I'm effectively off it. And the capturing of the real world experience again in my life with my children, with my family, with whatever. And sometimes I talk on the phone, but I don't mind that. Like I'm sitting at swim practice or something, I'll talk on the phone, but it's so profound. And again, at the core of what Haidt is saying also is it has to be a family parent participation thing. Like we're giving our kids over to this, but we're also setting the stage for them. We're also showing them that phones are more important than families. We're also showing them this fragmented attention. And in our fragmented attention, we're missing their fragmented attention because we're not present. So we're not seeing that they're not present. Just like you said with your son, he realized when his phone's gone, how much other people are glued to their phone. Well, if he's glued to his phone, he doesn't see it, right? It's so crazy. He references the book, The Shallows, actually. I read that back in 2008. It was a really good book. But that author, it's same thing. He recognized he used to be very much into English and writing and getting really deeply into these little nooks and crannies with arguments. And he said he couldn't even do it anymore. He was too used to the short, essentially website style, 400-word blip with a bunch of advertisements and a bunch of things. Mm-hmm. And we just exacerbated that.
Yes. And then that fourth foundational harm is addiction, because we get hooked, as you mentioned, and that there's this dopamine release in this like pleasurable moment as we're watching it, but it's not actually really fully fulfilled. So we have to keep watching. And so this is why people have to just keep scrolling to see what's going to come up next, knowing that nothing really actually that great is going to come up. But for some reason, it's because we don't have this 100% fulfillment of having that moment that we keep scrolling through it. I mean, I was just sitting with a professor yesterday and I was talking with her, and it was just like one of those moments where like all these things came together, and it was just like this really happy moment. And she was like, "Hey, I'd love to do research with you. Let me know." And we were talking about things, and it was just awesome. Those are the feelings and the experiences that we want, that are like superficial, that people are searching for on social media, because it's this asynchronous experience, and it's not real connection. We as humans need that real connection, and we're not going to get it in the digital world.
Right. It's like we're starving to death and we keep reaching for Diet Cokes. We think it's something that's going to solve the problem. It's not. Speaking of addiction, there with tech, there's the classic example that people are forgetting about, which is Flappy Birds. Do you remember Flappy Birds?
I don't know. I can't. Okay. Not off the top of my head, no.
Right. Because the creator of it made, like, you should Google Flappy Birds and find out how much it costs to get an iPhone like 2 with Flappy Birds installed on it. It's thousands and thousands of dollars. Flappy Birds was a program that was literally like this, just this, it's like scrolling, like Mario Brothers, like this bird that flaps up and down, and you have to keep hitting it, and the bird like goes up and then falls in, and you're like dodging all these little things. It was so addictive that people started like losing it. Like they would play Flappy Birds for like 10, 12 hours. So the designer actually removed it from the App Store and killed it. And like it's one of the great cases of a tech innovator realizing that they had really tapped into something dark and bad, and they removed it. You can't get Flappy Birds. And there have been a bunch of, obviously copycat programs, but nothing as successful as Flappy Birds. It's so hard to explain the addiction and the level, because we're used to addiction with like somebody shooting up heroin, throwing up, like all these really, really ugly, horrible things. But even, like I've had my spat with video game addiction, and I remember reading about somebody who went psychotic when I was in college, because by the way, I would play video games for 24 hours straight. That gave me the opportunity to be wildly successful, to take risks with very little danger, to get these reinforcement, sounds and experiences. And there was a social aspect to it because it was a mass multiplayer online game. And here I was wasting away, getting poor grades in my classes, gaining weight, losing in the real world of life, but checking that Diet Coke box in the virtual world. And I remember reading about somebody who played for 36 hours straight without stopping. And by the way, I was clocking in at like 12 to 24 sometimes. Like I'd stay up all night playing. And he went totally psychotic and like started running around the street because he thought everybody was like orcs and elves and they were coming after him. It's like, this is my life. Right? But it's really hard to explain, I think, especially to adults when you're a young person, how important something becomes to you when it's so obviously unimportant to the other person, but it's this world or experience or reinforcement system that you've immersed yourself into that replaces the longer, more dangerous, more tedious real world reinforcement system. Mm-hmm. Because how long does it take for the average 19-year-old to do anything worthy of praise? It takes a long time, right? These things offer instantaneous. Mm-hmm. And then they provide you with a community that also reinforces it. They're like, you made level 20, good job. That's great. You made this, or you got that weapon, like, good job. And you have real friends that are across the world. Yeah.
Air quotes, real friends, but it's all just really superficial. And the last kind of component of this rewiring is focusing on, he separates out girls and boys at this point. And he says social media harms girls more than boys. And he gives some examples of how, girls are more sensitive to comparison. Girls are more apt to use social media in a way that's going to allow them to, what does it say?
Achieve communion?
Well, like undermine people's reputation.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Reputation slander. Yeah, defamation.
Yeah, reputation slander. And then their emotions, they're more emotional. And so they share their emotions online. And so then they have a ability to impact other people in that way because other people's emotions are being absorbed in that way. And so I thought that that was interesting. And we kind of talk about that in the episode that we had before on the digital and tech. And you have this, you've got some great things on your podcast, The Ranch, when it comes to, targeting girls and boys too, but it really is more towards girls. And then he talks about boys, what's happening with boys. And I really enjoyed this section because I just think, it's really important for us to focus on our boys. And he talks about the failure to launch and how more young boys are going out of education, employment, and training. That, you had kind of mentioned earlier in secondary, in college, in higher education, 60% are women and only 40% are boys. And that has flipped over the years. And we need to be talking about those things. I've got 2 boys. I care about, their experience. I care about the children in my community, their experience. And so boys are having this failure to launch. They're not going into education and training and schooling in the way that they used to. They're participating in fewer riskier outdoor activities. He goes into what that means, but just that hey, it's important to take risk. That is an important part of development. And then to your point, he talks about video games and how there's that addiction there and it leads to a mental health decline, but also that pornography is targeted at young men particularly. And so it's really important, I think, for parents to be able to, hey, technology and social media and these things that are out there are dangerous for our children, but it's also important to be able to differentiate what's happening for girls and what's happening for boys, because while they can be similar, they're also different.
Yes. And this particular part of the book was something that for me, I was like, yeah, he saw me. And this is, I think for young men in particular, and he makes the distinction between young women in large part trying to establish communion and very tight social knit bonds and effectively, create and engage in deep and meaningful communities, and then young men attempting to create agency. And this is something that I realized when I was 19, 20, which is, okay, look, what are you doing? Right here, I'm playing these video games. I'm not doing well in the real world. And I had to sit down with myself and okay, look, here's the deal. You're getting excited because you're growing in competence and ability in this. I literally had this moment. It was so embarrassing to even recount, but I remember looking at my character online and I was like, oh my God, I think his biceps are getting bigger. And it was kind of a joke, right? But then I realized in that moment as a 19-year-old, I was like, you only like that because you want bigger biceps. And you're not going to get bigger biceps doing this. And I had to take this step back and really assess, what is it that you're getting at? What is it you want? Because what you want is driving you towards this, but are you going to get what you want? And what I wanted was agency. What I wanted was the ability to move through the world. What I wanted was to have something to offer people. Why do you want to have something to offer people? Well, ultimately, I think I wanted to have a partner that I was worthy of. And I was only going to have a partner that I wanted to have if I became somebody that had something to offer the girls that I liked, right? And I was not going for, low-end companionship. It was okay, you got to get something. That, I think, so deeply drives young men towards video games that they develop skill sets, they develop agency, they develop capacity. They're admired by people around them. They can hone these skills. And with the insertion of pornography, not only do you scratch this itch for agency and capacity and ability to move through the world. In fact, one of the Kiki Kimura style individuals that he interviews in this book is oh, I can do anything on my computer. I can do anything. I don't leave my room. I can do anything. You can't do anything. I want to be able to do anything. I tell my boys, what does dad care about? Nothing. I don't care about anything. I don't care how scary it is. I don't care how hard it is. And I don't. And I believe that I'm going to move through the world. And I want my boys to grow up to be men that can do the same thing. You don't know how to do it. Doesn't matter. You're going to figure it out. You're going to work it out. This is what we do. And when you become that type of person, I think just biologically, you have different selections and opportunity for mating, and you get better options, if any options at all, right? Because most men have not had great options throughout the history of the world. I think this is one of the things that drives young men so deeply to video games. And then the derailment with pornography, which is I have this false sense of capacity and agency, and I can get any mate I want to, and the style of pornography and the way it's made. And I would like to say I've never seen it, but that's absolutely not true. I absolutely have. And I can tell you, like, it's not good. And to imagine being a young man and having access to that, it was like, oh my God, it would totally squash my drive towards the anxiety-provoking task of addressing young women and presenting myself for judgment, usually in a failing manner, but it's horrible to do, and it's what we do. We engage with risk and embarrassment and danger in social and physical settings, and we ultimately become something. And that's what the world needs us to become, right? That we need to be able to move out of our house. We need to be able to move into a room filled with women and have the confidence to navigate that. And we need to be able to present ourselves, as horrible as I hate even the concept of it, for judgment and take the feedback. You're not good enough. Be better. But you can be better. Go be better.
Right. I love what you offer just in that like imagery of a young man who is experiencing like pornography and is so, I mean, you know, Jonathan's kind of talking about this, so ingrained in it. And then because they're so ingrained in it, they don't want to go out and experience the world. They have this total disconnection with the real world and this asynchronous experience actually with the digital world. And it's totally inhibiting who they are as an individual. And until I feel like parents and teenagers really come together and understand, gosh, what does access to this does this really mean for my kid, and have those hard conversations, and parents like kind of, you know, drop some of that fear and all of those things. That's how we help our kids move through this stuff, because the fact is we do have kids who are, you know, addicted to pornography, and it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to address. And it's something to address today because we want our children to be able to launch, to go into the world, to have these experiences, but they can't because they don't have the proper self-esteem and the proper belief in self to be able to do that when they're looking at pornography. I feel like pornography limits all of those things. It squashes all of that stuff because it gives anyone who's looking at it this false sense of reality.
And it's not, yes, that. And I think it squashes your desire.
Yes.
That's it. It's like, I don't need to go after that girl who is plenty good looking and cute and whatever. And let's say she's like a B. Okay. I don't know. I'm just saying like, because you have access to the A pluses that appear.
Right.
And your brain,
you have access.
Your brain feels like it has access to these perfect, incredible people that are going to do anything happily with you, right? That's how your brain registers pornography. And so for the 16-year-old who's awkward and doesn't have a lot, not only does he not have confidence, he doesn't even have the drive. Like, our children walk because they can't keep up with us. They develop skills because they're frustrated. If you remove the tension from the young men, they will not seek to slay the dragons and do what they have to do to face their fears. They're only facing their fears because they have the anxiety and tension, because they want partners and they want companionship and they want agency. They want successes. We take away all of that. We're like, I'll give you all of it. I'll give you all the women you want. I'll give you all the success you want. You just sit right in that chair. Don't do anything. And it's like, done. You have this with any drive. You give all the food to somebody that they want, they're not going to work for food. You give somebody all the money, all the things they want, they're not going to be driven to go to work in the morning. This is how you give somebody all of the women they want. They're not going to work to do what has to be done to create long, lasting, and enduring relationships with a partner. They just will not, because they're like, hey, look, I already got it all.
Yeah. And this is what's happening with our teenage boys who have social media because pornography is targeting them. Like, that's really the point, that they're being targeted. And it's important for us as parents to be aware of that so we can remove our children as targets. Right. That's what we need to do. We need to remove them. Okay. So now we've gotten to the point of the book where Jonathan Haidt is talking about the action that parents can take and school administrators and lawmakers. I mean, he gave a lot of different ideas within this section of the book.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he says, kind of like leading into this section, is that basically the strongest communities of people are born out of something that helps lift them up. And for me, that felt really inspiring because I was like, that's what we have to do right now. We find ourselves in this situation that we need to address as parents, as community members, school leaders, lawmakers. We need to address, and we can come together. So it felt really empowering at that moment.
Yeah, I love, and again, the concept of collective action, of having an enemy to fight together, a moment of self-reflection and self-determination. I love all of that. I like, let's go I'm all in.
You're all in.
I'm all in.
You're all in. Now, I was just listening to this other podcast, and I'm going to link it in this one particularly because a lot of times when people go to take action, they're not looking at some of these underlying behaviors or beliefs that might stop them from being able to be successful. And it was from Dr. Brene Brown on her podcast, Dare to Lead. She was speaking with Lisa Leahy, who has this book called Immunity to Change. And there's 2 podcasts that it's like a part 1, part 2 that Brene is speaking with Lisa on. And they're talking about how people want to change, but a lot of times when they really believe in this thing that they want to do, they kind of start, but then they're not able to really bring about the changes that they want. And so Lisa goes into sometimes these conflicting beliefs that people have and figuring out how to address those so that you can bring about that change that you want to bring about. And so I bring that up because I think at the core of what we're talking about, and when I talk with parents, there is this, yes, I want to do something about this. But that sometimes when people start down this road, there's things that get in their way and they're maybe not able to kind of continue on the path that they want. And so if that's the case for anyone that's listening, or if you're interested in that idea of, hey, yeah, I want to be a part of this collective action for a healthier childhood, but I can see that maybe some of my fears on letting go of my kids being outside, right? Those types of things. That's a really good podcast. And Lisa Leahy in her book on Immunity to Change is really good. Throwing that out there.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And again, I think I know I've mentioned this a couple times. If you had the 2 options without being in one of them already, I think this would be a much easier thing for people to address. If you were already going down the option of no tech, right, or low tech or limited tech or whatever it was, you would never select the option that hooked your kids up to tech companies, made them addicted to pornography, gave them eating disorders, caused all kinds of scams and emotional trauma. Like, I've never met a 20-year-old that was happy she or he had social media. I've never met them. It's like, oh my God, it was so great to have. No one ever says that. But because we're in that shoot right now, moving out of it, like immunity change, like moving out of it seems difficult. But we would never select this option had we not already started down this path. We're just, oh my gosh, I got to change. Oh, you got to change. Because you're choosing this one every day.
Yes. So Jonathan breaks this down into 4 different categories. One, which is like this voluntary coordination, which we'll get to. I just want to name the 4 that he's got. So voluntary coordination, then he talks about social norms, technological solutions, and laws and rules. And he basically breaks them down into saying that, like, voluntary coordination, this is parents supporting each other. And that also links in with some of these social norms of reverse the negative moralization of childhood autonomy. Meaning when you see a child out in the neighborhood and maybe they're 6, 7, or 8 and they're just, maybe they're walking to the store, or they're walking to school by themselves, instead of thinking like, where's that parent? Why isn't the parent watching that kid? Maybe it's more of a, hey, isn't that so great that child is experiencing a level of autonomy that's really great for their development.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
And then the technological solutions, which he kind of will dive into just in terms of like what schools can do for that. And I think also within our homes. And then laws and rules, because governments can create laws and they haven't for a really long time. So when we talk about, I'm going to start kind of on big picture at first. And this is what Jonathan does too. And he talks about government and tech companies. And here in Idaho, we had a legislator, Senator Cook, who this is like the second year in a row. I mean, he is what's the word? Like a software engineer guy.
He's
like,
a tech something
for like over 30 years. And as a lawmaker, he's been working to try to bring about changes in the tech world. And he asked the Idaho PTA, which I'm a part of, to participate in supporting this one bill that he had this last legislative session. And all this bill would have done would have said that when a parent purchases, like when an adult purchases a phone for a minor, anyone under the age of 16, and it's purchased particularly for that under 16-year-old, the software would automatically switch to child safety. Because this is on the device already, but it's on auto off. It's not auto on.
Right. The toggle's off when you purchase the item. Now, mind you, I don't even know how to find the toggle. It's an elaborate process. It should be the first toggle. I tell this at the presentation. It's like when you hit settings, it should literally be the first question that pops up and then confirm it every single week. Like, is this phone owned by a minor? Yes. Or somebody under 12 or 30, whatever it is, like yes or no. And instead it's buried and we don't know where it is.
Yes. And there is like this 15, 20 step process to be able to find it. And you can like go to this website and figure out how to do all these different things. Or the software engineers can just toggle it off, auto off. And in the process of having the bill, I mean, a lot of people came in to support the bill. I remember sitting in the room and listening to Senator Cook walk through the bill and all these different people testify on the behalf of it. And I believe it was in the State Senate Affairs Committee. And the committee said, hey, you know what? You came last year. You took our notes on this. We're really appreciative of that. We're not quite sure how this is going to land on the Senate floor, but we're going to support your bill. And so it was voted to proceed out of committee. And then Big Tech had been in the room that day for testimony, but then like Big Tech just descended upon the Senate and it never made it off the Senate floor. It died.
Man, I think I have Cook coming on Monday. Yeah, Senator Cook. So this is one of the things that I'm in fierce agreement with about that the probability that politicians will resolve this problem with laws, it seems extremely small, right? And this is one thing I tell parents: don't assume that politicians are protecting your children, not because they don't want to. Like Senator Cook wants to protect Idaho children, and I'm sure he wants to protect all the children of the United States, but he can only affect Idaho. He's an Idaho senator. So here's the thing. He doesn't have the tools to do it. He even knows the problem. He knows an existing issue in technology that would help protect minors from harmful stuff. And the tech industry descends on Idaho like vultures on a carcass, this little piddly state, and they go hard on Senator Cook. Look no farther. There's nothing that we could come up with that's more demonstrative of the inability for politicians working within our existing political structure to take on $1 trillion tech industry.
Okay, yeah. So what you're talking about, like with big tech and descending on Idaho, there's a great story with the Senator Julie Van Orden. And she tells the story about how when she was the state PTA president, they, as parents, wanted to remove all the cigarette cartons from the counter because they didn't want kids to have access to them. And so they did this great grassroots effort, and they were able to, create a law that would remove those cartons from the like grocery store counters and from the mini marts. And she said big tobacco descended on Idaho at that time. And listening to her tell that story, it was so cool because I just thought, that was a group of parents coming together to make the change, and they were able to do that because they banded together and they wanted to do that for their kids. Now, I acknowledge that tech is different, that when people look at tobacco, in the most part, they're looking at it like, yeah, that's gross and disgusting, and I don't even want that in my life. I mean, there are people who are out in the world that smoke, but for the most part, I think that a lot of people look at it like, yeah, that shouldn't be in the process of in access to children. But when we look at technology, technology really blesses and gives us a lot of great things in all of our lives. And that's the hard part with this, I think, in some measure, that technology, I mean, as an adult, I really like technology. I can do really cool things with it. And so that's the hard part for lawmakers, I think, as they're going about trying to create these changes. Haidt notes in the book that the most recent law that the national government was created was in 1998 with some child protection law, and it designated children. They had to have parent permissions if they were under the age of 13. Now, that was 1998, and the internet looked very different back then. Now, just recently, I did hear someone say, a woman who speaks on technology on Instagram, it's scrolling to death. That's what it is. And she spoke about how I think President Biden just signed into law how social media now has to report on certain types of crimes that occur on their sites, that this was not happening before. So I feel like movement is being made, but it's very slow. And this is to the point, to your point, Matt, of like, at the end of the day, it has to be the parents who are working to address these issues for kids. But as a community, we can come together to try and work to make these changes. And I feel like we should.
Yeah. I would liken Biden's push to, hey, let's tell everybody what's going on social media. We're not going to make them take responsibility for it because they're just making a market for communication. But we are going to tell them. It's similar to the law that was passed. I don't think they have it here, where you have to, if you're a chain restaurant or a franchise restaurant, you have to display the calories and nutritional information of the things you're selling. So people are like, that's 1,500 calories. That's a lot. But they still order it.
Sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes. I will say that it's not.
They order it every time. They don't care.
Some people,
care.
I do think that posting nutritional facts has value. And so I do think what President Biden has done in this moment is taking us a step in a direction that we need to go, but it's not the final step. We need to keep going.
Right. And here's one of the bigger problems. I think danger is in the eye of the beholder. And what I mean by that is that's one issue, which is parents use social media. Like I use Instagram. I don't get date raped. Right. I don't get human trafficked. Somebody tried to scam me the other day, and I do what I always recommend every single parent does. I had the conversation with this woman named, Anya, who is like a Ukrainian, whatever the lie is. I have no idea. And I go through this thing like, oh, I'm David. I say David, not Matt. Anyway, and I go through and within two or three text messages, she's like, maybe we should exchange a photo. I'm like, sounds great. And so she sends me a photo, and I go to ChatGPT not ChatGPT, but an AI generator, and I generate a photo and send it back. Like, I engage in the conversations, and I save that conversation so that my sons can see these conversations. Like, you see this? This is a scam. They're going to do this, this, and this. And pretty quickly, they're going to want to exchange a photo, and they're going to want you to send something inappropriate back. So the point is, in general, though, I don't engage with risky or dangerous things on my phone. And because of that, a lot of parents look at their phone based on a level of risk or danger that they experience and assume that the same thing will be true for their kids, which is like, oh, I use this thing all the time. It's not that dangerous, right? It's also not the kind of thing where when you're using a knife, you have an inherent level of understanding of how dangerous it could be. So even though I don't cut myself, I still hand the knife over to my kids saying, now this is very sharp. You could cut yourself. Most people just say, this is just a phone. Right? They're not confronting the dangerous, sharp knife of the phone on a regular basis, right? And so because of that, we fail to shift perspectives on usage and risk level with our young people because we don't even know. You can't even assess the danger your kid's going to get into because you don't even know what they're going to do with the phone. How are you going to assess the risk if you don't even know the actions that are going to be taken? If you're like, all right, look, you're going to jump on roadblocks, that's X risky, or you're going to talk to strangers, that's Y risky, or you're going to do these things. You don't even know all of the bad things they're going to do. And you don't know how they're going to respond, which is the other thing. People grossly overinflate the level of cognitive ability and perspective that their young people have. Every parent will say, my kid would never do that, ever. Doug Hart, the FBI agent, who we've talked about a couple times already, He says every single time he went to take a case or take a report or something, they're like, I thought my kid was smarter than that. I can't believe my kid did this. I talked to my kid about this. We had this conversation last week, and here they are sending their home address, climbing out the window, and these horrible things happen to these children. So people assess the danger of their technology based on their usage and how they think their kids are going to use it. And they grossly overestimate their children's capacity to work through a complex social situation with a like professional predator. You know, and because of that, you just see all these terrible things. It's like you can't stop it.
Right. Which is, I mean, kind of following up with some of these things that government and tech companies can do. One is raise the age of the internet adulthood to 16.
Right.
That's something that they could do, right?
Right. That would help a ton.
Yes. Facilitate age verification. Encourage phone-free schools. We have a lot of schools that are going phone-free here in Idaho. There was just a news article in the Idaho Statesman about how the largest school district here in the state is creating a policy about, phone-free schools. And that's going to look a little bit different in every school, just in terms of where they keep those phones. I'm going to go so far to say is like, if they don't make that a phone-free day for at least elementary school and middle school, I don't know that it's really going to solve all of those problems for them. I do know that, I think there was one school that said it's always phone-free until lunchtime, and then kids can check their phone at lunch. But it was interesting because I was talking to my daughter, and as we were talking about this, my high schooler, she said, well, this teachers already have these little, air quote vaults in their classrooms where they're just like, they almost look like, where you can stick your shoes, like a shoe thing. Yeah. And she's like, teachers already do that. And I was like, sometimes. And then sometimes, and she's like, oh yeah, it really depends on the teacher and how that's carried out. And, schools, there hasn't been a district-wide policy. And so I'm really hoping to see parent or schools carry this out in a way that's going to be meaningful, because if administrators don't get buy-in from teachers and offer them the type of support that they need, then teachers aren't going to carry it out in a meaningful way across the board that is actually going to have a meaningful impact for our kids. And that's really important to me, that this change helps create a positive experience for kids. I was just talking to my teenager and I was telling him, as we've been going through all these different things with brain development and technology and the impacts for him and all these different things, I was like, there are going to be times when you are so annoyed with me. When I know you've been playing that video game for an hour and it's time to be done. And I'm like, hey, you got to be done. It's not that I don't do this now anyways, but we're just having some more candid conversations. And I was like, and as a parent, I have tolerated and I will need to continue tolerating your irritation with me in that process. When and if that gets, and that's hard sometimes as a parent, when the kids are little and you're trying to foster something else and they're giving all this pushback. That's hard. This is it's about, as adults, creating this resiliency to be able to bring about the change that we need for our kids. And that even needs to happen within our schools. And part of that is not when we bring about that change in the schools, it's parents figuring out how to support that change that's happening there. That Debbie Critchfield, the superintendent of public instruction, says she sees schools and parents as this three-legged stool. It's a three-legged stool. It's the teacher, it's the parent, it's the student. And when those three things come together, that's when we have the secret sauce, essentially. And that's what we need to do when it comes to these phone changes that were being, phone policies that were being seen that are starting to make their way across our state. That parents, if you can and if you're willing to really see the value in the policy for the benefit of your child and support it at home and help encourage your child to be supportive at school so that teachers can carry out that policy, which is for the benefit of our children.
Listen, I agree with you. And I agree with Debbie Critchfield. The three-legged stool is like a one-person tipping over right now. Because first off, students are not happy about this. They could eliminate their phones, just today. So you're missing one leg. Okay. The number of parents that actually will fight against a phone-free day is a lot more than you think, actually. Now, it's a minority. It's not over 50% from what I've understood, but it is a very, very loud, sizable fraction.
And tell me, I think we need to talk about why they're fighting against it.
Okay, so check this out. My partner, Dave, Deputy Gomez, in the project we're working on, he put out a post on his Facebook page, and his Facebook page, like I said before, has like over 250,000 people. I'm like, oh, I'm the idiot. Okay. So he puts out this thing, and he finds this old school photo of somebody with like a tan Buick and an old school like mobile phone with like the suitcase and everything. And it's in the trunk. So like the trunk lid is open. And this guy's on this like brick of a phone, right? And he, Deputy Gomez, makes this recommendation. He's like, hey, here's the thing. There are something like 1.6 accidents associated with cell phone usage while driving cars in the United States per year. Okay, 1.6 million. And this includes deaths. It includes, manslaughter. It includes, all kinds of bad things. He's like, put your phone in your trunk. Right? That's a physical place that you can have your kid put the phone in the trunk. If it's in the glove box, they're going to grab it. If it's on the seat next to them, they're going to, it's in the purse, and you're like fishing through the purse and like lipstick and, then you get the phone. I don't wear lipstick, but, and I don't have a purse. But the point is, it's there.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is a good idea. The number of people that flipped out and he came up with the most unlikely safety considerations, like what happens if she gets in a car accident, flips over, and they're in a river? How is she going to get a hold of me? And he's like, flip over, they're in a river, she's going to drown, and you got to call your mom. Like, that's not a realistic situation. Like, okay, what if she gets pulled over or somebody hits it? Like somebody comes up with an example of somebody intentionally causes a car accident, like just a bumper, like bump. What is that?
Fender bender.
Thank God bless it. It was fender bender. You had it.
Yeah.
Somebody gets an intentional fender bender. Your daughter pulls over, and this person's intention is to like murder them. Okay. And again, he's like, okay, there's murderer, your cell phone. Like, how is it like the Wonder Woman shield? Like, bing, like it's not going to.
Yeah.
So people come up with unbelievable considerations specific to school. People are saying in the event of a school shooting, which is an incredibly low likelihood, not impossible, but incredibly low. In the event of a school shooting, I want my kid to be able to get a hold of me. Now, some crazy person walking around with an AR-15 in school calling your mom is not going to fix anything. That being said, let's look at the best course of action in the event that there is a school shooting. What needs to happen is communication between the defending adults to keep children safe. And if you are a defending adult, say you're a teacher in a classroom with 30 people, do you want to get a call from the office, instructions from a principal or whoever is defending the school saying you need to do this or you need to do this, and turn around and see 30 sets of eyes staring straight at you, say, kids, this is what we're doing now, and they go ahead and do it? Or do you want to hang up the phone from whoever called your classroom, turn around and see 30 kids with their heads down, freaking out, crying, running around, doing whatever with their phones? You don't. In the event of a real emergency like that, you do not want 30 extra cell phones in hands. And that's just the reality of it. And if you talk to any law enforcement person, they will agree. You want fewer distractions. You want quicker communication from the people who know what the best communication is. And I think that's just incredibly hard for people. I think the idea that they would not be there with their child in a time of crisis, that they wouldn't have the ability to defend their child in some way, or connect with them is just terrible. I think it really stops people, and they're like, I can't compute. Like, I can't go along with this. I feel like you're cutting the umbilical cord off from me and my kid.
Well, and it plays back into what you had mentioned earlier about like just this constant news cycle and all these things that have played into what now are a normal part of fear that people experience every day. And I think that based on some of the things that you're sharing, that most of these are based on fears, but fears that are founded in stories that are so, the percentage is just so like less than 1%, that's where I think we need to be looking as a community. Like, where are our fears founded, and are they really founded in reality, or are they founded in these stories that we're seeing on the media, because the media keeps playing the same stories all the time? And it's a fair question that I feel like people need to ask themselves, because at the end of the day, it is about creating these spaces for kids where they can learn and grow. And I'm here to tell you, and I know that you probably had this very similar experience. I went to high school without a cell phone. I made it through every day without a cell phone. And when my parents needed to get a hold of me, which was on a very rare occasion, they would leave a note they would call the office. I mean, I do remember getting a cell phone for high school, and it was for the car, and it stayed in the glove box of the car. Like the cell phone didn't ever leave the glove box. And the one time I had to call my parents because there was an incident in the parking lot and the police officers, this is like not the point for the story, but I had to call my dad.
What? The ambulance driver was a jerk too. I don't know what his problem was. But the fire captain was very nice.
I don't even think I used my cell phone. I used the school phone to
the
make a
case got closed 2 years later. It was fine though.
It got closed
there's a case
like a week later.
You got a case number?
It got closed like a week later. Thank the dear Lord for my parents, and it got closed a week later.
But if you need a defense attorney, I have the best guy.
But the point is,
no, he was terrible.
The point is, a cell phone didn't help me through that scennario.
Right.
I remember it was kind of a very nerve-wracking scenario as a teenager, as I can remember junior or senior year. And it was one of those, okay, like I use the school phone to give my dad a call, and he gave me some great advice, and then he headed on into the school. And so I just think like, it's remembering that like we've lived before this. And so it feels like we can't change, but we can. And it's just about addressing those things. Two other things that I really liked that were pointed out by Haidt was that government officials can design and zone public spaces that are intended for children. So creating spaces, whether like they're great sidewalks in neighborhoods or bike lanes or places where there are less cars come down into some downtown areas, a place in mind for play structures and to be able to explore in areas if they're living in urban areas, I think are important to keep kids in mind for that. Those are other things that can be done. And Idaho does a good job of our career tech education and some vocational opportunities. And I know that Debbie Critchfield spoke about doing more of like apprenticeships and getting juniors and seniors out of their class, out of their seats. Those programs I haven't seen come about yet. But those are other things that can be done to help our kids in this age of high tech and social media.
Yes.
Just from the government standpoint.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I actually, as I was going through this book in preparation for this podcast, I've actually been interviewing the Ada County Commissioner candidates, and I've been talking to them expressly about this, which is Idaho and the Treasure Valley in particular is a good place to live, which is distinct from places that you can live tolerably and make ungodly amounts of money. And when you have places where you can make ungodly amounts of money, the government doesn't have to worry as much about making those places great or awesome or hospitable to families. They have to worry about making sure the money keeps flowing. So that's why you have areas of, say, like Northern California and Silicon Valley that are not great places to live. They're not child friendly. You don't have high quality parks and whatnot because people are making absolute fortunes the world has never known from these places. And it's very geographically centered. Here, you don't have that. You have a place that, the industry is growing. We have all kinds of things, but there's always been an intentional step towards how do we make these parks better? How do we give more open space? We have incredible green belts. We have whitewater parks. We have expo centers. We have all kinds of things. So you're right. There is a push, and I talked to all of them about this because there's an argument that a large amount of the growth that the Treasure Valley, or excuse me, at least Ada County is going to experience initially in the next 10 years is going to be an unincorporated Ada County, which they have control over designing. If you're going to develop in a city like Eagle or Meridian, you have to go to the Meridian, obviously city council and development and whatever. But there's so much unincorporated Ada County that's viable and close to city centers that they will be in charge of it. And that stuff will largely be annexed in over the next 30 or 40 years. But it's the intentional designing of spaces that are hospitable, that are not like the ever shrinking playground and the less and less and less entertaining. It's making sure you have water pads. It's making sure you have things for multiple ages. And it's really being intentional with designing your community with children in mind.
So schools then, when we're talking about things that they can do intentionally for kids and designing certain types of spaces for them to thrive in not just a phone-free area, but also a child, like a play-based opportunity, because that's this is what Haidt's arguing, that we overprotect in the physical world, we underprotect in the digital world. And so correcting that means being more vigilant in the digital world and creating a space for kids to thrive in the physical world. And part of that is with their play and how they play and how they utilize their spacing. And so he just kind of talks about how kids need to have recess. Kids need to have probably more recess than they do. I had a lot of recess in elementary school. I know my kids have less recess than they did in elementary school. So more recess, more opportunities to play. He gives some great examples in there. One of the things that he talks about is the Let Grow project. Do you remember this part in the book? Okay, I just loved it, where it was yeah. Did you want to say something?
The recess, just real fast. I didn't know you were going to transition, because Let Grow is a bigger thing. His recommendation, or his observation, that largely young boys really need a lot of recess, and the recess is the thing that's taken away from them when they act poorly. This happened to my boys time and time again. Trash, kindergarten teacher, trash first grade teacher, where I have energetic boys, surprise. And this trash teacher would yank his recess time because he was too energized and trying to write something out, and he just couldn't get finished. She's like, fine, you're going to have to finish that over recess. And then of course, he's seeing all his friends play, and he's sitting here trying to do this thing. And he's like, it's too windy, I can't. She's like, fine, you're going to have to do it at lunch. And so then she sits him in the office in the conference room. This is he had to be 6 at the time. 6-year-old sit in the office writing this thing out with his lunch, no adult supervision, nobody in there. And he's in the office. So he's kind of in trouble. And then we come to find out that he breaks down in tears. Poor little guy. He's freaking out. All of a sudden that day, we don't even get a call. They just send home the work saying he has to finish this. And we're like, finish this? What is this thing that he didn't do? And then we start digging. We're like, wait, he was in the office? And they're like, yeah, but we talked to him after he started crying. It's wait, what? So again, the idea that you can restrict activity for an overactive person is just so counter to reality. And he makes the point there, they don't need less recess. If you have a kid who's having a hard time sitting down and just going through the factory style education, they need more recess. You need to run them until they drop, and then bring them in and talk to them about what's a consonant and what's a vowel.
Yes. Agreed. 100%. So then this other project that he talked about was this Let Grow project, where it's about you can go to this website and read all about it, but it's about giving a kid the assignment to go home and do something that they've never done before, which I love, because it's about the exploratory process of being a kid and having experiences. And there are things I don't know, do you remember some of the examples from this that were just so good that I love?
Letting him go into letting him go shopping for you, letting him run something down to a neighbor's house without you, essentially letting them go out of your line of sight and accomplish any task.
Yeah.
Right.
And I kind of look at this giving kids an opportunity, though, even in the home, if we're letting kids grow, we're letting them have experiences. It's me as a mom teaching them how to clean a toilet and then letting them do that. Letting my kid have that experience, right? It's about giving kids these intentional experiences to be able to participate in a home and a family and, in a neighborhood, and having a neighbor and run this over there, so that they can gain that confidence in those experiences as kids, so they can go grow into the next thing that they need to. Yes. And those things are really important for kids as they're doing schoolwork too. But schoolwork's just not near as fun as sometimes I think as these at-home things can be. But when they have these at-home experiences and they're learning and growing along the way, then they gain that belief in themselves that, hey, I can do this really hard thing in school right now and stay focused because I've done all these other things before. It's building upon that. And kids need to have those experiences. And I think that's something that schools can support for the home life. Whereas, there's always so much home supporting the school life. I think that it would be really awesome if the school life also supported the home life.
Man, I very much agree with that. I very much agree with that. We actually reached out to our my first graders teacher this year because they were sending them home with like a bunch of homework and a lot of stuff. And it just became this bloodbath at home on a more regular basis than was necessary for my first grader to accomplish these homework packets, where like my fourth grader wasn't even coming home with really homework. And we did reach out to the teacher and said, hey, look, how crucial is his learning to this homework that you sent home? Because this seems like a lot and he's all these. And she ultimately was like, listen, he doesn't have to do it if you don't want. Like, if it's not working, it's not working, which bothers me because it's like, why are you giving any work that's anything but like absolutely crucial? Like, that's ridiculous. But we did have a give and take and recognizing, okay, this is what you're trying to get out of it. This is what needs to happen out of this stuff. But having that relationship where it's like, look, the school life can't, or the school obligations can't make my home life crazy. And I'm going to support you, teacher, by making sure my kid gets good food, good sleep, these things. So your job isn't terrible, but we got to work together. And I did feel like the teacher was respectful of that and did want to work with us. That, you know, again, the school life supporting the home life and back and forth, that's crucial.
Yeah. So then Haidt moves into what parents can do, which we've, talked all along the way in this conversation. He gives an analogy that I thought was really awesome. I happen to like and had not heard before about the difference between a carpenter and a gardener. And he likened parenting to these two jobs, and that a carpenter goes in there and is trying to get materials just right because the carpenter wants to create something that's just exactly precise. They want to measure twice, cut once. And that a lot of times this is where carpenters don't want anything that's messy, right? Messiness is the enemy to being a carpenter. And then he spoke about what it's like to be a gardener and how gardeners go in and they till up the ground, they plant their seeds, they water, and they weed, and then they allow their flowers to grow and flourish and, whatever is growing in the garden. And he basically said that as parents, his perspective is that we be gardeners for our children. We allow them, we give them the structure that, the appropriate structure that they need at the time in our physical world. And then we allow them to grow and flourish. But a carpenter style parent is going to come out there and try to be so controlling about everything that's happening because they want something that's just so. And I can see that this happens particularly now with kids getting into college and kids having these different experiences. And I want my kid to take these AP classes. I want my kid to be able to get into this college. I want my kid to be this type of athlete. So at the age of 5, I'm now going to have this over-structured time all the time with my kid playing these different sports so that they can get to that collegiate level. I mean, this is, I think, one of the things that contributes down to, parents like, oh, well, I need to control their time in the afternoon because they're not safe if they're alone. So what I'll do is I'll go out and I'll find some sport team and my kid can join the sport team because then it's structured time and they're safe and watched over. When in reality, Haidt kind of talks about how that structured time is really all too much of that structured time for kids is harming their development because kids need to be able to play together without adults watching them all the time. That's really important for children's development. What do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts on this one. I do absolutely agree with unstructured play. And in fact, I had to intentionally teach my children how to build things with Legos without instructions. And they didn't. They were like, oh, I can't build it. And I'm like, no, you can. Like, let's do this. And you start helping them make something out of chaos and randomness. And then they start developing creativity. I remember some of the first pieces they brought too. They're like, what do you think about this, Dad? And I was like, super over. Oh my God. It sucked. It was terrible. But they kept going and kept going and kept going. And now they build things out of no instruction. They still have cool, like, Star Wars things that they, like a bust of the Mandalorian or something. But they have the ability to make things up out of nothing. And my 10-year-old this last weekend I went up to his room and it's like all across his room. He's got this stuff on the floor. I'm like, what is happening here? And he had a fidget spinner that he was trying to figure out a way to affix to an erector set engine so the fidget spinner would spin. And he kept running into problems. He's like, it's the balls. And I was like, oh, he's putting it in the bearing. Like he's trying to get the thing to, but I was like, but buddy, this is going to spin because that's what it was like. Maybe we could affix it to the side. So then he was trying to like essentially drill. So again, that type of creativity is something that I initially was like, don't do that. Like, what you're going to burn, or, I thought you're like, oh, you're going to damage it because he was pushing the engine into the fidget spinner. I'm like, who cares? It's a dumb little fidget spinner. Like, let him figure it out, because that's how I figured out the physical world, like by messing around with mechanical stuff and understanding it. I think that stuff is great. I also very much like, I struggle with this, and I'll tell you why. In the absence of a community that I deeply trust, I don't want my kids going to hang out in an unstructured manner with other children when I can't see them. Now, 30 years ago, 100%, right? And like, yeah, you still had problems with, kids acting poorly to each other, or, maybe some kid got hurt and he does something bad to one of the, fine. You've always had those problems. But now, in an unstructured manner, unless I know I'm sending my kid to a family with a philosophy that mirrors mine, I don't want my kid ending up in somebody's room on a piece of tech looking at really bad stuff. And I think that, again, collective action. If you can get a community of people to do that, that's great. But for the average person, just like, oh, I'll let my kid just go down the street. Like, I could do that too. And I know what lives down the street. And what lives down the street is completely unmonitored tech in the hands of like a third grader who's already doing really, really bad things, right? Like, these are considerations that I think need to have more recognition, right? Because we're not just dealing with the risks of the physical world, which is more of this idea. Let them do something, let them engage in something that's both risky and messy that you're not monitoring. Okay, great. Where, when? Don't even tell me outside at the park. Like, you see kids huddled over cell phones at the park all the time. So it's a difficult one for me because I'm trying to work this out with my kids. I'm trying to navigate it with my kids. And it's not as simple as like, just let them go outside. Because I know if they just go outside, they will find other kids who do not have the same parenting, philosophies that we have, and they will end up on tech. And I guarantee you, the odds of your kids ending up on something bad in tech in your house while you're watching them, possible, but not great. A possibility of getting a bunch of 11-year-olds together in the middle of a field with a cell phone, very high.
Well, and I'm so glad that you bring this up, because it's what you're saying, I totally agree with. And I mean, I remember, gosh, when we were living not here in the Treasure Valley, we were living somewhere else, and my oldest was like the neighbor's kid had come over. The neighbor had come over, and the cousin was with the neighbor kid. And I was like, oh yeah, they're just, playing here, and, stuff happens. And all of a sudden I see this kid outside my house, my kid's there, the neighbor's there. So the neighbor's cousin, right? And he's got this gun in his hand. And this kid had been in my house.
Like a gun.
Like a gun. And I was like, I don't even know if my kid was outside at that point. And so my kid comes in, and I ask him, like, what happened? And, it was an airsoft gun. I found out it was that. And the kid had also like brought a knife with him. And I was just shocked because this kid had come into my home. I hadn't seen anything on him. Right. And so in that moment, I called the neighbor. And I told her exactly what had happened. She was very apologetic. I mean, it had been her nephew. She wasn't aware that her nephew even had those things. And she was like, I'm going to take them away from him right now. And then I said to her in no uncertain terms that it's not okay with me that any type of weapon come into my home. No knife, no gun, no nothing. We don't have those things. I don't want those things carried in. And she agreed with me. And so to me, this kind of points to what you're saying in that, hey, it's important for us to keep an eye on our kids. And it's also important for us to create as parents these play groups, these neighborhood, parent action kind of groups where we are on the same page. When my kid goes to your house, Matt, I just want you to know I don't want my kid on technology. Right? You have
100%.
Right? You have those conversations. And so, gosh, I was just having a conversation with a friend today, and I was telling her that my 12-year-old loves going to her house because they do all sorts of fun things, and it's not centered around technology. Right. And her kids don't have technology. They're not playing with it. And I know that about that home. And so I feel very comfortable sending my child there because as adults, we're having those conversations. So that's what I think is valuable or really important to do at this point now in terms of this, well, hey, what can we do as parents? One of those things is having the conversations, figure out what type of tech kids have access to, because you're right. We have to be aware of what's going on that level if we don't want our kids to have access to that level of social media and technology within a home, because it's not safe for them at these young ages.
Listen, this is at the heart of it. Yes, like Haidt was on Rogan years back, and I think I mentioned it, but he was on Rogan years back talking about how like he trained his, 7-year-old to like go down to the corner bakery and get something and come back. And he lives in New York, right? And the kid had gotten lost at one point, and she called her dad. It's like, okay, can you see any like landmarks? Like, can you see? And you're like, oh, and the kid kind of triangulates himself or herself, I can't remember, and like makes it and comes back. And it's like, okay, he's making that argument based on the one biggest risk we should have, the one biggest risk that people have in mind is that the kid will get kidnapped. Okay, great. And he's like, and the odds of that are slim. And based on the low probability of this one danger, I let my kid engage in these things. Okay, we're not tracking one danger though. If you look at the Agent Hart says, look, two things you always ask yourself: to whom do I give my children over to? And under what circumstances? And there are damaging things that can happen. Let's say in my neighborhood, okay, there's a lot of construction. There are damaging things that can happen to children wandering around in construction areas, unrelated to like, oh, I stepped on a nail. That's bad, fine. But like random workers that happen to be there, large vacant houses, a lot of areas that nobody can see. There are damaging things that can happen to children that are not related to those children being kidnapped. And those are far more prevalent than kidnappings, right? You can have bad things happen. And let's take away the transient worker that like, rapes a kid, which happens all the time, right? Let's take that away. Let's come down to what about kids doing bad things, right? They're just, again, focusing on tech, which is the point here. You have such high probability that a group of kids, even if that group doesn't have technology, that they will come into company with somebody who absolutely does have technology. And there's a high probability, because being tech safe is not the norm, right? There's a high probability that that technology will not be monitored. And, then once you're in a social setting, it's, oh, let me show you something shocking, because that's what everybody does. They're not like, oh, this is a picture of my grandma. They don't do that, especially young men. So again, you get it. I feel, I don't mean to be beating a dead horse, but it irks me that there's a laissez-faire style being advocated for when you're really looking at one big risk that, fine, we can all agree is a low probability, but neglecting the 1,000 other highly probable risks that will have damage. Because look, I don't want my 10-year-old or 12-year-old coming in contact with like hardcore porn. I don't. It could happen it's 60 seconds. Some kid shows them. And then they're like scrambling to find this stuff more because they don't know what they saw. And it's like, they're trying to like, the whole thing. We don't have to go through all of it. I don't want them coming into contact with that. And that's something that doesn't factor into the paradigm of risk from the 1990s, where it's like your kid's going to get kidnapped. Nobody was like, don't let your kids go to Johnny's house because Johnny's watching hardcore porn. Right. And now it's not Johnny, it's everybody with a cell phone, right? Especially young men.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why it's really important to, well, one of the things that I feel like you're hitting on here is that, and Haidt even said it in an interview where And I think he actually he says it in his book that he acknowledges that he's going to get criticism over some of this stuff, and that not everything that I think in this collective action section that he's put out is going to land with people. And he's up for making changes and having those conversations, which I think is super awesome. So you're hitting on some points for you that as a parent don't land. Not everything that Haidt says in this book, when it comes to the actions that parents can take, that doesn't land for you. And I think that that's really, it's good to read a book and to think critically. Gosh, we want our kids to be able to do that, so we as adults shouldn't be just taking everything that someone says so like innocently. Like, we do have to make the appropriate applications here in our world today. The thing that I liked about what he was offering, particularly with the scenario, like the analogy of the gardener and the carpenter, was that it's an approach.
Yeah.
And for me, it's this approach of, I want my kids to be able to grow and develop and become the types of adults that can launch, that are successful and have a positive experience in the adult world that's not centered around major mental health issues because they spent so much time accessing social media and other forms of technology that were hindering their development.
Yes.
And so some of the things that he talks about in here, about not micromanaging. Hey, if you want your kid to learn to walk to school, create a walking group or drop them off a block away so they can have that experience. Go camping, form neighborhood friendships of families that are all on the same page when it comes to technology. But again, none of these things can happen if, as parents, we aren't having these conversations with our spouses. We need to have these conversations with our kids, and we need to have these conversations with our friends and our neighborhoods that we trust, and we want to kind of go on in this action with. And then also this extends to our school, like further into our school communities, about having these conversations with our schools and wanting to make sure that the schools are providing the right type of environment for our kids, so that when a kid is taking an ISAT test, that's the Idaho standardized, assessment test, that they're not being told, because this really did happen in our kids' middle school, that, hey, if you do well on this ISAT test, you can have access to your cell phone during lunch. Ugh.
God, I heard about that and I laughed so hard. Because you don't get it both ways. You don't get to be on the verge of initiating a no cell phone policy because cell phones are damaging, and then use it as an incentive too. You either have to admit that it's bad and it's not helping the academic environment and it's not helping you in general, or you don't. And one or the other. And if it's not damaging and doesn't have all these detrimental effects, don't have a no cell phone policy. But you don't get it both ways. You have to admit this is bad and we shouldn't use it. And if it's bad and you shouldn't use it, no incentive.
Yeah, no, it can't be both ways. And let's just say that we don't use that as an incentive. What if it was gosh, you get extra time just to hang out in the great weather on a break?
Great.
That would be awesome. Facilitate some fun stuff outside.
Give me a popsicle party. Give me the high fructose corn syrup popsicle. That would be better than giving me a half hour on a cell phone. Yeah. At least I'd have a chance to burn off the calories.
100%. 100%. And so,
did you ever do an egg race, by the way?
Yes.
With the spoon in your mouth and I never did an egg race. How, we need to bring back the egg race Olympics.
We should.
Yes.
Now I'm going to make a mental note of them. And
thank you.
I'm going to write this down right now.
I actually am going to make an egg catapult this summer with my boys.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's going to be they each build something. We're going to build the catapult together, and then they're going to each build a creation that will encapsulate the egg, not hard boiled. Don't cheat.
Yeah.
You're going to build something that encapsulates the egg, and we're going to shoot it with a catapult. And whoever can get it the farthest without breaking the egg wins.
That's amazing. My kid did that in high school. I think 9th grade. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Those are good. Those are good things. So other good things, right, are one, parents do need to be aware of the parental controls that are on their phones. For kids, utilize those. If you don't know how to do those, search it on Google. Google will tell you how to activate different controls. And there are really good safety measures that parents can initiate on phones so that kids can learn how to be successful. So I'm going to put that out there. One of the things that he talks about is delaying social media accounts until kids are 16 years old. And he says, like, hey, get to know your kid, all these kinds of things, have conversations, because it's not about controlling your child. I mean, this was my takeaway. It's not about controlling your kid. It's about helping your kid be successful in life and allowing them to. I noticed for me that I use this phrase like table talk with teens, like inviting the teenager to the table to be a part of the process. As my husband and I have been talking with our kids about technology, about the impacts on them and all these different components, they're interested because it's their life and they want to be healthy. They want to make good choices. They care about their bodies and being successful as adults. They want to be a part of the process. So that's why I love that gardener perspective of like, let them be a part of the process. Let them grow and flourish. And as a parent, help them be able to do that.
I know I have a very angry look on my face. I realize. I can't, because you know what I think? When we talk about a 16-year-old.
Wait, what can't you do?
I'm going to tell you right now.
What can't you do? You can't invite your kid to the table and help him.
Me and my 12-year-old and my 10-year-old are listening to this book on audiobook. So I have a 10-year-old who's listening to Jonathan Haidt talk about troubles with video games, pornography, eating disorders, predation. They ask for me to turn it on when we get in the car. They make me pause it and they have meaningful questions. I am all about talking to my kids. I am all about preparing them. But when I think about what I would need to prepare them for at 16, for going onto social media, it's like, okay, you got to prepare them about the scams. Like it's almost like you're preparing them to drink and you're like, okay, listen, you're going to feel hungover tomorrow. Okay, you're not going to want to put this down. You're going to be subject to all kinds of scams. You're going to want to scam people. Because the one thing I tell parents, and in particular, and students too, right? So like I have a presentation that I do for students, and one of them is helping them understand that we built this world that they're now existing in that is bringing out the worst possible pieces of their humanity. And emphasizing, I am no better than you, no better, okay? Because when I was a kid, and I go through this whole process of me trying to download porn off the internet in like 1997 or 1998. First off, you're on a dial-up modem. So it's like, and somebody picks up and the image, like, first off, you had to find it. Cause like I didn't have the Google in 1997. Like I didn't even know what Google was. It might've been around, but I didn't have, so like you're crawling through the internet trying to find like a dirty picture, right? And then once you find it, you have to download it and it takes forever to just like, it's coming down like one line.
Can you please say cause I feel like you're looking at me like you and I'm like, I
had to.
Okay.
So I'm downloading this thing and it's going line by, and then somebody picks up the phone to make a call. I'm like, no, oh, you almost had it. And then I got to like find the site again.
Oh my God.
So I'm going through and like, it's all of this ridiculousness, right? Mm-hmm. And to just find, and then I have to actually make a folder because I can't find it again. So I save the pictures to my hard drive and I make a little folder on my desktop that my grandpa finds. It's this whole, and I have this whole bit that I go through, right? And I relay that to young people so that they can understand. It's like, I'm no better than you. I just didn't have the ability to download as much porn of the nastiest, craziest stuff I would ever imagine at my fingertips 24 hours a day. I also, if I wanted to see somebody, naked in real life, I had to be somebody who got a girlfriend who and was worthy of her trust and like all of these things. It was an involved process, not something to be undertaken by the faint-hearted, right? And that's what you do. Like, that's what people do. They meet each other, they develop relationships. Now, if you don't feel capable of functioning successfully in that manner, there are all kinds of options for you to scam your classmates, for me to scam you. We're 16. I'm like, text you from an anonymous number. Like, hey, Alexis, guess what? I know I'm great friends with your ex-boyfriend and he showed me those pictures you sent him. And if you don't send me a new one right now, I'm passing out all the other ones to everyone on Instagram. You freak out. You're like, oh my God, don't do that. I'm like, you have 30 seconds. So you run to the bathroom, take a picture of yourself to the back. Now I actually have a picture of you. That's a felony. Okay. I'm no better than the kids today. when I was 17, I was the same as 17-year-olds. I just didn't have, it wasn't like a monkey with a machine gun. I didn't have the ability to tap into the lesser demons in my psyche and like be tempted to do these things. And I'm not saying I would have done it, but like, if somebody was like, hey, check out this picture of Alexis, I certainly wouldn't have looked away as like a 16 or 17-year-old. I wouldn't have been like, hey, whoa, right? At least not with somebody sitting me down and being like, look, Matt, you're going to be a man one day. This is not the man you want to be, right? And then I'd like to think that my 16 or 17-year-old self would have recognized like, oh yeah, I can't do this, right? So the point is, to prepare the 16-year-old for social media, I'm running through all of these things that I would have to tell them, like, this is going to give you the opportunity to become a worse person. And we know that our 16 and 17, 18-year-olds now are acting like the worst 16, 17, 18-year-olds in the history of the world. Every girl is an amateur porn star. Every, dude is sending pics of themselves. I don't know how to reconcile that while saying, okay, yeah, all this bad stuff, but keep in mind the good.
Well, I think that one of the things that I'm hearing you say, though, is that like, okay, you don't like the age of 16. And Haidt even says like, well, I think at some point was like, well, I would assume pick 18, but most people aren't going to go along with that idea. So I'm going to, when different
So we
studies,
all capitulate and give our kids bottles of vodka at 16, right?
I just think that like, you know what they're saying, there's, certain studies showing, different things. Gosh, I mean, look over in Europe, they let teenagers drink alcohol. And,
Sure.
and I heard teenagers here, there were teenagers in the States that went over and did a, study abroad kind of experience, and they loved it. And they were out with kids who were drinking. They themselves chose not to drink, but they were like, really actually wasn't as big of a deal over there that is, we make it here. And society, so like culturally, it is different.
Sure, they have nude beaches and stuff too.
Right,
like there are differences.
There's differences, but my point is that like I think at the end of the day, whether you agree with his perspective of the age of 16 or not, my point is that I think that there's value in inviting kids to the table to be a part of the process, to learn and grow, so that they feel like, hey, even if my parents are going to give me limits on these things, I'm learning about it. Because I'm here to tell you that I do know a guy who wouldn't let his kids have any sort of technology until they turned 18. And he didn't realize that like at the time it was an iPod was nearly the same as an iPhone, that you could access anything that you wanted on that thing. It just didn't have the capacity to make phone calls,
yeah, right.
on
I remember
cell
those,
data. And he tells a story about how he was at Costco and his son, who was like 17 and a half, was like, hey, can I get this? And his dad was like, he was telling his dad all about what was on there. And he was like, yeah. Dad was like, yeah, you can. They get in, they're in line at the store to buy it. And the dad realizes that the iPhone is the same as like the iPod. And in like total sadness, he just turns to his son and is like, I can't let you have this. And his son was really disappointed. He's 17 and a half. He's not going to make this scene in Costco. So they go put it back. Well, so the son doesn't get it until he's 18 years old. So, but then I hear from a mother later and she's like, well, what that dad doesn't realize is that like that kid has social media accounts on all of his friends' phones. It's not like his dad is stopping him from having these social media accounts at the age of 17 and a half. The kid's having the accounts. And the dad is just not choosing to be a part of the process, the reality of teaching his kid. And I'm not saying that the dad should have given his kid the phone, but what I do think is the dad missed an opportunity to invite his kid to the table, to at least maybe be a little bit honest with him, or to have some conversations to prepare him for what he would encounter. To your point about, hey, you engage in some of these scams so that you can show your boys later, this is what happens. Be prepared for this when you, at some point in your life, will encounter that. And that's what I think is really important. That was like probably one of my biggest takeaways from the book, was that having these conversations, giving our kids these having these conversations about digital technology is so important. Limiting the amount of time that they have on this technology and really limiting that social media is crucially important for their mental health. And then giving them more opportunities in the real world, especially I have all older teenagers mostly. And so, gosh, when my oldest teenager was 15, he wanted to go to the gym and I didn't want to drive him every day. It was like a mile and a half from the house. And I was like, ugh. And he said, well, I'll just ride my bike. And I remember being nervous. I was like, that's this certain road and there's a stretch where there's no sidewalk, but wear your helmet. And I remember just like, okay, kids ride their bikes. People ride their bikes every day. And he rode his bike there and he had his cell phone. And I could track him on the phone. I was, because I was nervous. And he gets to the gym and he's fine. He gets home and he loves it. And it's what is born in that moment is this kid who has realized that, hey, I can do this thing. And that gave him a level of independence that he really valued as a 15-year-old. And I'm so glad that I felt like it took courage for me as a parent to let him go in that way, to have that experience. And it was really valuable for his development. So those are kinds of the things that I feel like that I'm taking from the book, with the acknowledgement that like what I feel like you're offering here is that it's not across the board layout flat, that it's important for parents to figure out what's going to work for them in their homes with their families, with their kids. But at the end of the day, we have a major mental health crisis with our kids, with this Generation Z, and we've got to address it. And this is when it comes to social media and technology and addressing it as a community.
I have a friend from college. Well, we were friends in college. I haven't talked to him since. But I think he, in fact, lives in Ketchum. Anyway, he didn't have video games growing up. He had a Nintendo. I guess they got him a Nintendo at some point. He grew up in Seattle, went to this private school. His dad's an attorney, mom's a doctor, very educated family, voracious readers, like very, very smart people. And they got him this Nintendo. And I guess his dad walked in the room before school one day and Rob was sitting there playing this Nintendo. And his dad, without saying anything, picks up the Nintendo and throws it through the wall and just walks out of the room. And there's Rob, like controller in the hand. Doesn't talk about it, doesn't say anything. And I have a family member who has a 15-year-old. And the family member happens to be in law enforcement and happens to have been dealing with this exact stuff for the last, decade. So he knows way worse stuff than you and I could ever imagine that he will never be able to unsee. And he has his son now, like his son's on Twitter and some other stuff. And he's like, I have to go onto his phone every night and scrub his phone and like train the algorithm, because the algorithm is constantly trying to pass his son porn and, all of these terrible things. And I still can't get back to it. I still can't realize like, wait, every night you take your son's phone and like fight the X algorithm? Like, what are you doing? And the argument goes for some people that, my son's an athlete. I'd like him to be a college athlete. Like there was, I guess, some college coach that they were connected to. He was like, well, yeah, I kind of use Twitter or like, Instagram to find diamonds in the rough in like the middle of nowhere. And there happened to be, I don't know how baseball works. Like apparently you can find somebody that you wouldn't be able to, like if you can throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, like that should be common knowledge and you should pass it. I don't know. I don't understand baseball. But the point is, I still don't get it. I still don't see, besides the argument that like kids want it, I don't care. I don't care. The whole thing, it's like, well, invite them to the table for what? This is going to have nothing but heartache. Like, why don't we just start them having sex at 12? Like, why don't we just like, okay, I'm sorry. I don't get it. I don't understand. It's not like it's this overwhelmingly positive thing that also is a heavy lift. That's not true. There's nothing I'm going to be doing every single night to keep my kid safe that I'm not like eliminating from his life. Like if at 15, I'm like, okay, every single night, this is like my nightly ritual. Here I go to like save my son from these terrible things. And then I hand him his phone the next day. Like that's not going to be in my playbook. And to the degree that I can help bring him to the table, help him share in the understanding that it's like, I don't use this. You shouldn't use it. And there will come a time in your life when you will get to decide whether or not you want to use it. But while you're living in my house, I cannot understand why I, as a parent, would let you enter into this world. Now, when you're 18 or 19 or 20 and you want to scroll through all the porn your little brain can like tolerate, you have at it. But I'm going to give you the best possible shot of developing your frontal lobe, your frontal cortex as possible. So you can catch yourself and be like, wait, what the hell am I doing? I want to be cool. I want to be successful. I want to be somebody who would, be worthy of a girlfriend. I want these things for myself. I'm not going to get them through this phone. And you will also have incredible capacity to see yourself being squirrely and trying to go against these things as a 16, 17, 18-year-old and like, oh, my dad doesn't let me have this. I better make an account on my friend's phone. It's like, think about that. Think about what you're doing. Why are you doing that? What is so important to you? Are you the type of person where you're literally going to do something that you agree is bad just because your friends are doing it? What are you getting? I know I sound like a crazy person, like even saying these words, it's like, wow, you have really gone, the pendulum has swung, Matt. But knowing now, what I know, God help you, man. It's like you're intentionally raising your kids on Mars. Mm-hmm. Why? Mm-hmm. What are you getting out of it? You instantaneously become the voice that means the least in your kid's head when you give him a cell phone. The world of strangers mean far more than you the second you hand him a cell phone. Just think about the implications of that. Mm-hmm. How do I look, Mom? You look beautiful. Well, 1,000 people say I look trash. I'm going to go kill myself. What? What happened? You handed your kid over. Hand him over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. They're really heavy decisions that parents have to make for their kids. And what Haidt has done with this book is give people some words and vocabulary to have these conversations, to say, hey, you know what? It's really important to bring our children back to Earth. They shouldn't be on Mars. And that's going to take speaking up. It's going to mean linking up as parents. And he offers these 4 ideas, which you clearly don't agree with all of them. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
100%.
But that, no smartphones before high school, no social media before 16, phone-free schools, and far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. And he's just kind of saying, he's looking at the data, he's acknowledging what has happened over time, how, things have been limited and their child play has been limited, but screen time has been increased. And that's what's facilitating this coming together of this major mental health crisis.
Yeah. And Haidt actually is doing, I read this book obviously well after Deputy Gomez and I had developed our product, but Haidt is essentially doing what we're doing too. And I think at the core of it, he's giving people enough information that they can start arming themselves with better decisions. Mm-hmm. And again, obviously not identical, but making the case just hands down, okay, you win. This is not good for our children. That's it. That's it. And you can feel righteous and convicted and right in saying that at this point. After you read this book, my gosh, it's so conclusive. That's so valuable. And what we do with that, fine. What people do that, okay. The project I'm working on with Gomez aims to educate people meaningfully about school technology. What they do with that information, whether or not they even consume the entire program and take it to heart, okay, but at least don't say I didn't know. Same thing with drugs, same thing with alcohol, same thing with underage sex or unwed, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Nobody's perfect. We all have our vices. God bless it all. But at least Don't say you didn't know. Because the problem until recently is we actually didn't know. And now we get to see what our generation, what you and I are going to do about this. Are we going to continue selling our children to tech companies? Or are we going to be somewhat reminiscent of the actual greatest generation that got to work, that rolled up their sleeves, that did the hard things after coming back from World War II and rebuilt the country? Because we've lost our country. We genuinely have. We have lost our next generation, and they're not going to save themselves. It's us. It's only going to be us.
Yeah, I really like this idea of it's so important. It's so important. It's vital. I'll say this. It's vital for parents to come together and to speak up and on behalf of their kids, because now is the time for us to do that. And that means having these conversations in our homes, making the types of decisions that we need to for our kids, and letting our friends know in our neighborhoods and letting our schools know that there are certain things that we don't think are appropriate for kids and that we need to protect them from, because it's vital for their physical and for their mental health. And that's what I love about this book and about this conversation. That we've had today. And I so appreciate you taking the time to come and have this conversation with me and read the book so we can have this. And I want to encourage everyone to go read The Anxious Generation if you want to. If you're interested, there's some great things out there in terms of the content. So thanks, Matt, so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.